So here's something that's going to set the tone for everything we're about to talk about tonight. In 2006, a student at the California Institute of the Arts, a guy named James Garland Quintel, submitted his senior thesis film. It was an animated short called 2 in the AM PM, and the premise was two guys working a late-night shift at a gas station eat candy that's been laced with acid. That's it. That's the pitch. Two dudes accidentally trip on LSD during a graveyard shift, and the film follows their hallucinations as they spiral deeper and deeper into visual chaos. There's cursing. There's explicit drug use. It's raw. It's unfiltered. And at one point during the acid trip, the characters hallucinate and morph into something very specific. One of them becomes a blue jay. Another becomes a gumball machine. And if you're listening to this right now and you feel a little chill go down your spine, good. Because those hallucinations, that blue jay is Mordecai. That gumball machine is Benson. The acid trip that J.G. Quintel animated for a college project became the literal origin story of Regular Show, one of Cartoon Network's most beloved animated series of all time. A show watched by millions of children, born from an LSD trip. And I think about that a lot, honestly. I think about it more than I probably should. Hey, welcome back. If you're new here, this is where we go when the rest of the internet's asleep. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Tonight, we're peeling back every layer of Regular Show. And I mean every layer. The stuff Cartoon Network tried to bury. The scenes that got cut. The episodes that got banned in entire countries. The character backstories that are genuinely heartbreaking when you actually sit with them. And the real-world story of how a show about two slackers at a park was secretly one of the darkest, most existentially loaded things to ever air on a children's network. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time, because we're going to be here for a while, and this is the kind of thing we do. All right, let's get into it. I want to stay with that origin story for a minute, because there's so much more to it than most people realize. J.G. Quintel didn't just wake up one day and decide to make 2 in the AM PM. There's a whole creative ecosystem behind it that feeds directly into Regular Show's DNA. Quintel grew up in Hanford, California, this small agricultural town in the San Joaquin Valley. And according to Quintel himself, Hanford was kind of flat, and there was not a ton to do. So he and his friends were constantly inventing ways to entertain themselves. Just two bored guys in a nothing town, making their own fun. Sound familiar? That's literally the premise of the show. Mordecai and Rigby, two 23-year-old friends working dead-end jobs as groundskeepers at a park, constantly finding ways to avoid work and stumbling into increasingly insane situations. Quintel wasn't writing fiction. He was writing autobiography. When he was 16, his dad gave him a video camera, and he started making stop-motion films with Lego men and crude paper cutouts. He worked at a movie theater. He worked minimum-wage jobs, plural, just like Mordecai and Rigby work for minimum wage at the park. He was obsessed with The Simpsons, Beavis, and Butthead, British comedy, like The Mighty Boosh and The League of Gentlemen, and he played a ton of a video game called Toe Jam and Earl, which he later described as the perfect platform for the Mordecai and Rigby dynamic. Two weird creatures, hanging out, getting into absurd trouble. That's Toe Jam and Earl to a T, and that's Regular Show to a T. And he was deep into 80s rock music, which is why the show's soundtrack is drenched in synthesizers and power ballads and montage energy. This wasn't a guy who made a show and then found a style. The style was baked into his bones from adolescence. After Hanford, Quintel bounced around a few community colleges, College of the Sequoias, College of the Canyons, before landing at CalArts, the California Institute of the Arts in Santa Clarita. And CalArts is where everything changed. This is the school that's produced, a ridiculous number of animators. Tim Burton went there, John Lasseter, Brad Bird, Jindy Tartakovsky. Pendleton Ward, who created Adventure Time, was there at the same time as Quintel. And at CalArts, Quintel fell in with a group of about 20 students who had this tradition. They would gather together and throw random words into a hat. Things like lollipop or candy, draw one out at midnight, and then rush back to their desks to produce a short film in 48 hours based on that single word. It was creative boot camp, madness with a deadline. And out of those sessions came two specific films that are critical to the Regular Show story. The first was The Naive Man from Lollyland, made in 2005. It took Quintel about 8 months to complete, and it essentially introduces a prototype of Pops, this innocent, wide-eyed character from a candy-themed world. Quintel won 2 awards for it at the 2005 Nicktoons Film Festival, the Producer's Choice, and Student Animator Awards. It even aired on Nicktoons. So before Regular Show existed, Pops existed, and then came 2 in the AM PM in 2006, the Acid Trip short. And here's the thing that ties it all together. Quintel's friend from CalArts, a guy named Sam Marin, voiced one of the 2 gas station workers in that short. Sam Marin, who would go on to voice Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man in Regular Show. 3 of the most iconic characters on the show, all voiced by one guy who was literally there from the Acid Trip onward. He and Quintel had been in the same class at CalArts. They were friends. Marin went on to work at Walt Disney Animation Studios as an animator for 3 years before Regular Show got greenlit, and he left Disney to join Cartoon Network. I need you to sit with that for a second. Sam Marin left Disney, left the most prestigious animation studio on the planet, to go voice a gumball machine, a lollipop man, and a green guy who makes "my mom" jokes. That's how much he believed in what Quintel was building, and Quintel voiced Mordecai himself, plus High Five Ghost. So the 2 CalArts buddies who made that Acid Trip short together were now the primary voices of a Cartoon Network show. The entire foundation of Regular Show is 2 friends from college goofing around and turning their inside jokes into art. Which means when you watch Mordecai and Rigby hanging out, being dumb, having each other's backs, you're watching a fictionalized version of Quintel and Marin. And I think that's part of why the friendship feels so real on the show. Because it is real. It just has feathers and fur. Now here's where the story takes a turn that most people don't know about. Quintel didn't just pitch Regular Show cold to Cartoon Network. There was an intermediary step called the Cartoonstitute. This was a project created by Cartoon Network executive Rob Sorcher and headed by Craig McCracken, the guy who created the Powerpuff Girls, along with Rob Renzetti. The idea behind the Cartoonstitute was simple but revolutionary. Give animators the freedom to create short films without the interference of network executives and focus testing. No notes, no committees. Just make something good. Quintel was invited to pitch, and here's the detail I love. He decided to do a visual pitch rather than a verbal one, because, in his own words, I don't think me verbally pitching such an odd concept would have made any sense to anyone. So he storyboarded the whole pilot. Craig McCracken and Rob Renzetti watched his presentation and basically said, "Great, make it. No notes." That pilot was released on the Cartoon Network website on August 14th, 2009, and it led to Regular Show being one of only 2 series greenlit from the entire Cartoonstitute project. The other was Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, which eventually spun off into Uncle Grandpa. So Regular Show got its start because one program at Cartoon Network decided to trust animators without executive meddling. And that philosophy of creative freedom carried through the whole series. Quintel has said that Cartoon Network gave him the best creative freedom he'd ever experienced. And that freedom is exactly what allowed the show to be as dark, as weird, and as emotionally complex as it became. But that freedom had limits, and the story of those limits, the censorship battles, the cut content, the things Cartoon Network said no to, that's where things get really interesting. Let's talk about the first 3 episodes. The Power, which premiered on September 6th, 2010, was the very first episode of Regular Show, the very first thing audiences saw. And in its original broadcast, it contained something Cartoon Network would later try to erase. Rigby, in the original unedited version, says, "How in the H are we going to fix this H&S?" As in hell, and, well, you know. Another line had someone saying, "But he's gonna be pissed." In the versions that aired afterward, on Cartoon Network reruns, on streaming services, on home media, those lines were redubbed. How in the heck are we going to fix this stuff? But he's gonna be ticked. The mouth animations were literally redrawn to match the new sanitized words. They didn't just bleep it out. They went back into the episode, re-recorded the dialogue, and reworked the animation to sync new lip movements to the censored lines. That's an extraordinary amount of effort to cover up the word pissed. And it wasn't just The Power. Episode 5, Free Cake, and Episode 6, Meet Your Maker, both contained the word pissed in their original broadcasts. All 3 of these episodes aired uncensored for a limited window, and then they were pulled and replaced with sanitized versions. The originals were never seen again in their uncut form on Cartoon Network. Free Cake survived uncensored on the Party Pack DVD and on Hulu. Meet Your Maker was available uncensored on Netflix for a while, before the series was removed. The original unaltered version of The Power can only be found on the regular show. Slack Pack release. After those first 3 episodes, the word pissed was banned from the show entirely. 3 episodes in, and Cartoon Network had already drawn a line. And the thing is, the censored versions are so thorough, so complete in their erasure, that most fans who started watching the show even a year after its premiere have never heard the original lines. There's an entire generation of regular show fans who have no idea that the first episodes of their favorite show originally contained the word pissed. The sanitized version is the only version they know. And that raises a genuinely interesting philosophical question about what constitutes the real version of a piece of art. Is it the original intent? The version with the profanity? The version the creative team actually made? Or is it the version that most people experienced? The censored version? The one that shaped their memories and their relationship with the show? I don't have an answer to that. But I think about it every time someone tells me they've seen every episode of regular show, and I want to ask, but have you though? Have you really? And look, I get it. It's a kid's show. But here's what's strange about this. Cartoon Network was apparently fine with the concept of the show. 2 guys who do no work, get into situations involving death, cosmic horror, and emotional devastation. But they drew the line at a mild expletive that you can hear in any PG movie. The show could feature characters literally dying and being resurrected. It could show a character getting his soul ripped out by the Grim Reaper. It could have an entire origin story rooted in an acid trip. But the word pissed? That was too far. There's something almost comically absurd about that priority system, which, honestly, feels very regular show. The show itself is about how mundane things escalate into cosmic madness. And its own production history follows the exact same pattern. A mild word escalated into a full animation overhaul. But the censorship goes way beyond the United States. And this is where I really went down a rabbit hole. In the United Kingdom, regular show was censored extensively, and not just language. Let me give you some specific examples. In Ello Governor, the Season 2 premiere, which aired on November 29, 2010, Mordecai's line, "Oh crap, dude," was changed to "Oh man, dude." "Holy crap, it's real," became "Oh man, dude, it's real." "You're screaming like a freaking maniac," was changed to "You're screaming like a flippin' maniac." And from 2014 onward, the scene where the possessed taxi eats an old man and ejects his bones through its exhaust pipe was cut entirely. Let me repeat that. There's a scene in a children's cartoon where a sentient British taxi consumes an elderly person and spits his skeleton out the tailpipe. And that aired. It aired in the US, in Australia, for years. The UK only cut it starting in 2014, 4 years after the episode premiered. Which means there are British children who saw that scene before it was removed. I love this show. The UK censors also had issues with Death, which is hilarious given that Death is literally a recurring character. Death, voiced by Julian Holloway in a Cockney accent of all things, is the Grim Reaper who shows up multiple times throughout the series, making bets with park workers and threatening to take their souls. He first appears in Over the Top, Season 2, Episode 21, which aired May 23rd, 2011, where he tries to take the immortal life of Skips during an arm wrestling contest. The setup is that Rigby cheats in an arm wrestling match against Skips using a device called the Playco Arm Boy, which gives him superhuman arm strength. This causes Skips to fly into a rage. And in the process, Skips accidentally kills Rigby. And I need to emphasize this. Skips kills Rigby. In a children's cartoon, Rigby is dead. Gone. And the only way to get him back is for Skips to challenge Death himself to an arm wrestling match for Rigby's soul. Death, by the way, has a comically oversized right arm because he's been training it specifically to defeat Skips. Skips wins, Death spits on Rigby to revive him, and everything's fine. Except it's not fine, is it? Because a main character was murdered by another main character, and the solution involved gambling with the literal embodiment of mortality. On Cartoon Network at 4 in the afternoon. And I want you to think about what that episode is actually teaching kids underneath the comedy. It's teaching them that your mistakes can kill the people you care about. That rage has consequences, that when you screw up badly enough, the only way to fix it is to confront the most terrifying thing in existence and gamble everything on a physical contest. That's not a lesson most children's programming would dare to deliver. Most kids' shows teach you that if you say sorry, everything gets better. Regular show teaches you that sometimes saying sorry isn't enough. Sometimes you have to arm wrestle the Grim Reaper. And I'm not sure which lesson is more useful in real life, but I know which one is more honest. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Death came back. Again and again. In Dead at 8, Season 3, Episode 27, Muscle Man has a near-death experience after a waterslide accident, and Death agrees to spare him only if Mordecai and Rigby babysit Death's son Thomas, who's a 300-year-old demon baby that can talk and threatens to kill them. In Last Meal, Season 4, Death comes back for Muscle Man's soul because of a deal made in a previous episode involving a hot dog eating contest. In Skip Strikes, Season 3, Episode 3, Death blackmails Skips by threatening to reveal his secret, his real name, during a bowling tournament. If Death's team wins, he gets the souls of the entire park crew. The show treats Death not as a distant concept, but as a neighbor, a recurring character with a wife and kid, and hobbies. And there's something deeply unsettling about that level of domestication of mortality. Regular show doesn't hide from death. It invites Death over for bowling. And I need to mention the bowling episode in more detail because it reveals something crucial about the show's lore. In Skip Strikes, Death's bowling team, called the Magical Elements, consists of Death, Gary, one of the Guardians of Eternal Youth, and the wizard who owns the power keyboard from the very first episode. Think about that roster for a second. The Grim Reaper, a cosmic immortal, a space baby, and a magical keyboard wizard. They bowl together, as a team, on League Night. The Afterlife and the Cosmic Order have recreational activities. And when Death blackmails Skips during the tournament, threatening to reveal that his real name isn't Skips, Skips fires back with one of the most quietly powerful lines in the show. He says his friend's souls are more important than his secret. He'd rather have everyone know about his past, about Mona, about Walks, about the grief he's been carrying for centuries, than let his friends get their souls harvested. That's the moment you realize Skips isn't just the strong silent type. He's the strong silent type because his silence protects him from pain. And the one thing that can make him break that silence is the threat to people he loves. That's character writing. Deep, considered, emotionally layered character writing. In an episode about bowling, here's the thing about the show's relationship with death that I think most people miss. It's not just played for laughs. The show uses death as a genuine emotional tool. Characters die and come back, sure, but the show also has moments where death is permanent, where it carries weight, where there's no cosmic reset button. And the biggest example of that is in the series finale, but we'll get there. For now, I want to talk about the character who embodies this relationship with mortality more than anyone else on the show. Skips. Skips is voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, that Mark Hamill. Luke Skywalker, the Joker. And one of his favorite roles, according to multiple interviews, is Skips from regular show. And when you learn Skip's backstory, you understand why an actor of Hamill's caliber was drawn to the character. Because Skips isn't just the strong silent guy who fixes things at the park. He's an immortal being cursed to live forever. And the reason he's immortal is because the love of his life died saving him. His backstory is revealed in Skip's Story, Season 5, Episode 22, which aired on April 14th, 2014. And it's rated 9.7 on IMDb. That's nearly a perfect score for a single episode of an animated series on Cartoon Network. And here's why. Skips wasn't always called Skips. His original name was Walks. He was a regular person. Well, as regular as an immortal Yeti can be. And he had a woman he loved named Desdemona, or Mona. And she used to skip with him every single day. It was their thing, their shared joy. But there was a villain named Clorgbane, a bully with cosmic-level power. And during a confrontation, as Clorgbane was about to strike, Walks with his mace, Mona dove in and pushed him out of the way. She wasn't hit by the mace directly, but the impact cracked the ceiling above them, and a section of it fell and crushed her. She died. And that's when Walks made two decisions that would define the rest of his eternal existence. First, he struck a deal with the Guardians of Eternal Youth, These 5 enormous cosmic babies with deep voices who can grant immortality to become immortal so he could fight Clorgbane forever. And second, he changed his name from Walks to Skips because Mona used to skip with him, and he vowed to skip both night and day for the rest of his life in her memory. Every single time you see Skips moving across the screen in that distinctive bouncing motion, he's not just being quirky, he's mourning. He's honoring a dead woman he loved for eternity in every single frame he appears in. That's not a kid's show detail. That's Greek tragedy wearing a Cartoon Network hat. And here's where it gets even darker. Skips didn't just lose Mona. He has to relive the loss through combat because Clorgbane the Destroyer, the villain who caused Mona's death, is related to the Guardians of Eternal Youth as their evil brother. Clorgbane wanted to join the Guardians and become a member of the Immortal Student Council, but they wouldn't let him in because of his evil deeds. So he fights Skips every 157 years. That's the deal. Every century and a half, the guy whose actions killed the woman Skips loved comes back, and Skips has to fight him again. It's not just grief. It's scheduled grief. It's grief with a calendar entry. And in Fists of Justice, when Clorgbane returns for one of these recurring battles, Skips breaks his hands and can't fight. So Mordecai and Rigby have to pilot the Fists of Justice, these giant gauntlets of power, and fight Clorgbane in Skip's place. During that fight, one of the Guardians, Archibald, is killed. Even the cosmic babies aren't safe. Even the beings who grant immortality can die. Nobody in this show's cosmology is truly protected. Nobody except Skips, who has to live forever, watching everyone around him, mortal and immortal alike, eventually fall. And the Guardians of Eternal Youth are worth their own tangent here. They're formally known as the Immortal Student Council, 5 chubby floating babies named Reginald, Oswald, Boswald, and Griswold, and they each carry a magic rattle that lets them perform supernatural feats, like stripping someone of their youth. Every year on his birthday, Skips has to perform a ritual called the Spirit Dance for them to maintain his immortality. Miss a birthday, lose your eternal youth. So his grief isn't just emotional, it's administrative. He has to file annual paperwork with cosmic babies to keep the punishment, the gift, of living forever. And here's a detail that I think about way too often. Skips is the only character on the entire show who has 5 fingers. Every other character has 4. Some fans have connected this to The Simpsons, one of Quintel's favorite shows, where only God and Jesus Christ have 5 fingers. Whether it's intentional or coincidental, the fact remains. The immortal character, the one cursed to outlive everyone he loves, is drawn differently from everyone else. He's visually marked, set apart. Even his hands are a reminder that he doesn't belong in the mortal world. Let me pull back for a second and talk about something that I think is one of the most underappreciated aspects of regular show. The show is, on a very fundamental level, about people who are stuck. Think about every main character. Mordecai and Rigby are 23 years old and working as park groundskeepers. They have no ambition, no plan, no upward trajectory. Benson is their manager, a former rock drummer who was kicked out of his own band and replaced by a machine. Muscle Man, real name Mitch Sorenstein, is a groundskeeper who's never been anywhere else. High Five Ghost is, a ghost. And Pops is a naive man-child who's been sheltered his entire life by his adoptive father. These aren't aspirational characters. They're stuck in a holding pattern. And the show's central joke, that mundane situations escalate into supernatural chaos, is actually a pretty dark metaphor when you think about it. Nothing in their lives moves forward naturally. The only change comes from external forces, usually cosmic, usually dangerous, usually threatening to kill them. Without those forces, they'd just be there, forever, working at a park, doing nothing. And honestly, I've had jobs like that. Maybe you have too. And that's why the show hits different when you're not 12 anymore. When you're 12, regular show is funny and cool and the explosions are awesome. When you're 25, regular show is a mirror. When you're 30, regular show is a warning. And when you're 40 and you see the flash forward and Mordecai has gray feathers and Rigby's daughters are grown and Benson is still at the park, it's not a cartoon anymore. It's your life. It's every choice you made, and every choice you didn't make, and every year that passed while you were trying to decide. Let me tell you about Benson's backstory, because it's maybe the saddest thing on the whole show, and most people just think of him as the angry boss who yells at Mordecai and Rigby. Benson, voiced by Sam Marin, is a sentient gumball machine, but he used to be something else entirely. In 150-Piece Kit, a Season 4 episode, we learn that Benson was once the drummer for a hit rock band called Heir to the Throne, and not just any drummer. He performed what became known as the legendary drum solo on a 150-piece drum kit for the band's first album. A drum solo so physically demanding, it was considered humanly impossible. And Benson did it, but the band left him completely uncredited on the album. They denied he had anything to do with it. They claimed a drum machine called the Drumatron 6, had played the solo instead of him. And then they kicked him out after only 6 months, replacing him with that same drum machine. Let me walk you through what that means. Benson is a gumball machine who was replaced by a drum machine. He's a machine who was told he was less valuable than another machine. His entire identity as an artist was stolen, credited to technology, and then he was discarded. And now he manages a park. He went from performing the most legendary drum solo in rock history to making sure 2 slackers mow the lawn. And he's angry all the time. Of course he's angry all the time. Wouldn't you be? And there's a detail about the Drumatron 6 that makes this even darker, if you think about it. Benson was replaced by a machine, a drum machine, and Benson himself is a machine. He's a gumball machine. So the metaphor is doubled. He's a machine who was told that a different machine could do his job better. That his particular kind of machinery, his specific configuration of gears and talent and soul, was surplus to requirements. In our world, in the real world of 2026, that anxiety is everywhere. People are being told every day that machines can do their jobs better, faster, cheaper. Benson's backstory isn't just a cartoon tragedy. It's a prophecy. It's the fear that your uniqueness, the thing that makes you irreplaceable, will be rendered replaceable by technology. And the cruelest part is that the technology doesn't even care. The Drumatron 6 didn't hate Benson. It didn't steal his job out of malice. It just played the drums. It did what it was designed to do, and that made Benson unnecessary. The machine that replaced him wasn't evil. It was efficient. And efficiency in this context is the most terrifying thing of all. In the episode, Heir to the Throne comes to the park for a concert, and when they publicly claim the Drumatron 6 played the solo, Benson has to prove that it was him. And even after years without practice, he pulls it off. He plays the impossible solo again. And there's this moment where you realize that Benson never lost his talent. He was betrayed by the people around him, stripped of his credit, and left to rot in a job that's beneath him. And he's been carrying that resentment and that unfulfilled potential for his entire life since. That's not a cartoon backstory. That's a midlife crisis wrapped in a gumball shell. And I think there's something genuinely profound about the fact that the show never fixes Benson. It would have been so easy for the writers to give him a redemption episode where he gets back into music, gets signed to a label, plays to adoring crowds. But they don't. Because that's not how life works for most people. When you get chewed up and spit out by an industry, by a system, by people who used your talent and discarded you, you don't usually get the fairy tale comeback. You get a different job. A lesser job. A job where nobody knows what you used to be capable of. And you have to make peace with that gap between who you were and who you are. He doesn't get his music career back. He doesn't get the recognition he deserves. He just keeps managing the park and yelling at Mordecai and Rigby. Because that's what happens to most people who get screwed over by the systems they trust. They don't get a redemption arc. They just keep going. Benson keeps going. And every time he screams about someone not doing their job, there's this undercurrent of a man who knows what it's like to do something extraordinary and have no one believe you. Alright, here's a tangent. I need to talk about something personal for a minute. When I was in my early 20s, I worked a job that was, and I don't say this lightly, soul-crushing. And I had a coworker who was the smartest, most talented person in the building, and she'd been there for 11 years. And one day, I asked her why she stayed, and she said, because at some point, you stop looking for the door and start decorating the room. And I think about that when I think about Benson. He stopped looking for the door. He started decorating the room. The park is his room, and he's decorated it with rules and schedules and anger because if he let himself feel the full weight of what he lost, he'd shatter. Literally. He's a gumball machine. Okay, tangent over. Let me talk about what I think is the darkest recurring element of the show. And it's not the violence or the death or the cosmic horror. It's Rigby's intelligence arc. Rigby is presented throughout most of the series as the dumb one, the lazy one, the one who dropped out of high school. And the show treats this as comedy for a long time. But then something shifts. In More Smarter, Season 2, Episode 24, Rigby and Mordecai get into an intelligence competition that escalates, as everything does on this show, into something dangerous. But the seed that's planted here is that Rigby is insecure about his intelligence. Deeply, painfully insecure. And then the show does something that I genuinely think is one of the bravest creative decisions in Cartoon Network history. They give Rigby a multi-season arc about going back to high school to get his diploma. Not his GED. His actual high school diploma. This arc spans seasons, and it's treated with real emotional weight. In the Eileen plan, Rigby finds out that his girlfriend Eileen has ambitious life plans, a real future mapped out, and he panics because he has nothing. No education, no plan, no trajectory. So he secretly enrolls in high school. He doesn't tell anyone. He just starts going to classes while still working at the park. And when Eileen finds out, she doesn't laugh at him or feel sorry for him. She tells him she likes him for who he is. But Rigby keeps going anyway, because it's not about Eileen. It's about him. He goes through genuinely challenging situations. He travels to China with Benson as his teacher. He confronts a bully who becomes a substitute PE teacher. He deals with his father's disapproval and has to earn his respect through a dangerous downhill drive. And then, in the Season 7 finale, Rigby's Graduation Day Special, which aired in 2016, Rigby has to give a graduation speech. And here's the kicker. Mordecai, his best friend, is jealous. Mordecai, who went to art school, who had every advantage Rigby didn't, is jealous that Rigby is graduating. Because Mordecai never finished what he started either. He dropped out of art school, and seeing Rigby accomplish something that he himself couldn't finish hits a nerve. But Mordecai comes around, supports his friend, and Rigby graduates. The speech is broadcast live on a TV show called Inspire America. And for a show that started with two lazy dudes trying to avoid work, that's an incredibly meaningful arc. It says that it's never too late. That the thing you're most ashamed of can be the thing that defines your growth. That's not a kid's show message. That's a life message. And here's what kills me about it. Rigby's graduation arc works because the show earned it. It wasn't a sudden pivot. It was built over years. And the person who pushed Rigby to be better wasn't Mordecai. It was Eileen. A character who started as a background coffee shop worker and slowly became one of the most important people in the show. Their relationship is one of the healthiest, most genuinely sweet romances in animation. Eileen debuted in Season 2, had her first major appearance in Do Me a Solid, and over the following 5 seasons, she and Rigby went from acquaintances to friends to a couple. In Dumped at the Altar, Rigby reveals they've been dating for 3 months. Their first real kiss on the lips doesn't happen until the series finale. And in the 25-year flash forward at the end of the show, they're married with 2 daughters. That's a slow burn that spans the entire series. And it's beautiful. It's the kind of love story you don't expect from a show about a raccoon and a mole. Speaking of love stories, let's talk about the one that made fans genuinely angry. The Mordecai, Margaret, CJ love triangle. Margaret, voiced by Janie Haddad Tompkins, was Mordecai's primary love interest for the first 4 seasons. He was painfully, awkwardly in love with her. And in Stake Me Amadeus, the Season 4 finale, which aired August 12th, 2013, he finally asks her to be his girlfriend. He takes her to a fancy restaurant. He musters every ounce of courage he has. And Margaret says no, not because she doesn't like him. She's crying as she says it. She got accepted to her dream university, and she can't stay. She runs out of the restaurant in tears. Mordecai is devastated. And for a solid chunk of the audience, that was genuinely traumatic. Because the show had been building this relationship for 4 years, and it ended not with a dramatic villain or a cosmic explosion, but with the most mundane and real-world painful reason imaginable. She had to go to school. Then, CJ enters the picture. Cloudy J, a cloud woman, becomes Mordecai's new girlfriend in Season 5. and things are good for a while, until Margaret comes back. And despite both Mordecai and Margaret claiming they've moved on, they kiss in front of CJ. And it turns into this messy, painful love triangle that dominates seasons 5 and 6. Fans were furious. They'd already chosen sides. Margaret fans, CJ fans. And watching Mordecai fumble between two women, hurting both of them in the process, was genuinely uncomfortable. The triangle ends in Dumped at the Altar, the season 6 finale, where everything falls apart. CJ and Margaret come to hate each other because of the kiss. The relationships implode, and Mordecai is alone. But here's the part that really bothers people to this day. In the series finale, in the 25-year flash forward, Mordecai doesn't end up with Margaret. He doesn't end up with CJ. He marries a Batwoman named Steph, an artist he meets at a gallery after leaving the park to pursue his own art career. A character who literally does not appear until the final montage. Head writer Matt Price later revealed on Reddit that her name was Steph because the character wasn't even given a name in the show itself. Writer Owen Dennis confirmed on Tumblr there had never been plans to name her. And according to Price, the reason Mordecai ended up with someone new was that the Margaret and CJ stories were complete. Both women were on their own paths, and Mordecai had moved on, and fans were livid. Message boards lit up. Social media was a war zone. Team Margaret versus Team CJ became a genuine cultural battle within the animation fandom. People wrote essays, drew fan art, made video analyses, and the anger wasn't irrational. The show had spent years investing its audience in these relationships. Watching them both collapse wasn't just disappointing, it felt like a betrayal. People felt like the show had wasted their emotional investment. And I understand that reaction, but I also think it misses the point. Because here's the thing the show was actually doing with the love triangle that I don't think it gets enough credit for. It was showing you, honestly and unflinchingly, what it looks like when a person isn't ready for a relationship. Mordecai wasn't a bad guy. He genuinely cared about both Margaret and CJ. But he didn't know himself well enough to commit to either of them. He was in his early 20s, working a dead-end job, with no clear sense of who he wanted to be. And he was trying to build romantic relationships on a foundation of personal uncertainty. That never works. It didn't work with Margaret because she had a direction in life, and he didn't. It didn't work with CJ because he hadn't resolved his feelings for Margaret first. Both relationships were doomed, not because of the women, but because of Mordecai's own unfinished business with himself. And then, at the bat mitzvah painter lady revelation. In the series finale's flash forward, we see that Mordecai didn't just randomly meet Steph. He met her after he'd left the park, after he'd pursued art, after he'd become a successful gallery artist. He met her after he'd finally become the person he needed to be. The relationship works because Mordecai waited. He did the work on himself first. And that, to me, is the most mature statement about love that any animated show has ever made. You can't love someone else until you have something to offer them. And you can't have something to offer them until you stop working at a park and start working on yourself. And I think that's one of the most honest things the show ever did. Because in real life, sometimes the person you're obsessed with in your 20s isn't the person you end up with. Sometimes the great love of your life is someone you haven't met yet. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from the drama entirely and start fresh. It's not the ending fans wanted, but it might be the ending they needed. And honestly, I respect the hell out of that creative decision, even if it still stings a little. While we're talking about painful character backstories, let me bring up something that doesn't get enough attention, and that's Rigby's family. Because Rigby's home life, when the show actually shows it to us, is genuinely difficult to watch. In Dawn, Season 1, Episode 10, we meet Rigby's brother. And Dawn is everything Rigby isn't. He's tall, muscular, confident, successful. He's an accountant, he's popular, and everyone naturally gravitates toward him. He's the younger brother, but everyone assumes he's the older one because he has his life together in a way Rigby doesn't. And Rigby is consumed by jealousy. Not the cute, comedic kind, the real kind. The kind that eats at you. There's a flashback to Rigby's 6th birthday party where Dawn unintentionally steals all of Rigby's friends. Not maliciously. Dawn doesn't do anything wrong. He's just better. He's naturally charming in a way that makes Rigby invisible in his own life. And Rigby tells Dawn the most devastating thing one sibling can say to another. Dawn asks what he did wrong, and Rigby says, "Yeah, you were born." Imagine hearing that from your brother. Imagine carrying the knowledge that your sibling wishes you didn't exist, not because of anything you did, but because your existence makes them feel inadequate. But here's the twist that makes this episode genuinely beautiful. Don's response isn't anger, it's confusion and hurt. And then he reveals that the reason he is the way he is, the reason he copies Rigby's haircut, the reason he doesn't wear clothes just like Rigby, is because he looks up to Rigby. He's been trying to be like his older brother his whole life. The dynamic Rigby assumed, that Don was effortlessly superior and didn't care about him, was completely wrong. Don was performing competence to earn the approval of the brother he idolized. They're both performing for each other, both misreading each other, both hurting because of a miscommunication that started in childhood and calcified into identity. The episode ends with Rigby finally giving Don some sugar, which is what Don calls hugs. A manly hug between brothers who've been miscommunicating their love for decades. And I'll be honest, this episode wrecks me every time because I have a brother. And we went through our own version of this. Not the specifics, but the dynamic, the misread intentions, the assumption that the other person has it easier, the slow, painful realization that the person you've been envious of has been envious of you the whole time. Regular Show captures sibling dynamics better than most live-action dramas. In 11 minutes, with 2 raccoons. And this connects to Rigby's father, who appears in later episodes and whose disappointment in Rigby is palpable. There's an episode where Rigby has to earn his father's respect through a dangerous downhill drive. And the implication is clear. Rigby's dad sees Don as the successful son and Rigby as the failure. And Rigby has internalized that judgment. His laziness, his resistance to self-improvement, his willingness to be the joke, all of it makes more sense when you understand that he grew up in a household where his younger brother was considered the accomplished one. Rigby stopped trying because trying meant competing with Don, and competing with Don meant losing. So he opted out. He chose to be the slacker because at least that way the failure was on his terms. I want to take another small detour here and talk about Weekend at Benson's from Season 3, because it's one of the show's most audaciously adult episodes, and it ties into the hidden substance references we've been tracking. The episode is, first of all, a riff on the movie Weekend at Bernie's, where 2 guys drag an unconscious body around and pretend it's alive. In Regular Show's version, Mordecai and Rigby accidentally knock Benson unconscious, and instead of facing the consequences, they drag him around trying to cover it up. But here's the real secret of the episode. There's a drink in it called the Mississippi Queen, named after the 1970 mountain song, and it's described as a hallucinogenic concoction made from an unholy mix of kimchi, sashimi, shellfish, mayonnaise, chocolate syrup, soy sauce, and hot chili peppers. When the characters drink it, they experience vivid hallucinations, while the actual song Mississippi Queen plays over the scene. Let me just underline what's happening here. On a children's television network, characters consume a substance that causes hallucinations, and the show presents the hallucination sequence as a full psychedelic visual trip set to classic rock. This is a drug episode. They just called it Hot Sauce, and the 1970 hit song Mississippi Queen by Mountain plays during the hallucination, which, for anyone old enough to know the cultural context of that era's rock music, adds another layer of implication that the show absolutely knew what it was doing. And speaking of knowing what they were doing, let me talk about Caffeinated Concert Tickets from Season 1, because it contains one of the most bizarre scenes ever broadcast on Cartoon Network. In this episode, Mordecai and Rigby need help staying awake, and they encounter a giant coffee bean character. And this coffee bean gives them coffee by squeezing his nipples. I'm not paraphrasing. I'm not exaggerating. A sentient coffee bean squeezes his own man-boob nipples, and coffee shoots out of them into Mordecai and Rigby's mouths. On Cartoon Network, in the 3rd episode of the series. The scene was eventually cut in the UK from 2014 onward, and was removed in Latin American broadcasts. But it aired in the United States, uncensored, for years. And somewhere in the Cartoon Network approval process, someone watched an animatic of a coffee bean lactating caffeine into 2 characters' mouths and said, "Yeah, that's fine. Ship it." I genuinely want to meet that person. Let me shift gears and talk about the show's hidden adult content, because the acid trip origin is just the tip of the iceberg. Regular Show is absolutely loaded with references that sailed over kids' heads, but hit adults like a freight train. Let's start with the most obvious one. The time 420 appears on clocks in the background of multiple episodes. For anyone who doesn't know, and I know you know, 420 is universally associated with marijuana culture, and it's not a one-time thing. It shows up repeatedly. In one episode, a character even says, "I've got a 420 at a 420," which, I mean, come on. That's not subtle. That's barely coded. Then there's the Pink Floyd posters that appear in backgrounds. References to The Big Lebowski, one of the most iconic stoner films ever made. The show has been described by multiple critics as secretly catering to stoners. And frankly, when you look at the evidence, it's hard to argue. Two guys who do nothing all day, who get into surreal and psychedelic situations, who eat junk food constantly, and whose adventures often feel like they're operating on dream logic. The whole show reads like a trip report with better animation. And remember, this comes from a creator whose thesis film was literally about taking acid. Quintel knew exactly what he was doing. The subtext isn't subtext. It's just text with a children's network logo in the corner. But the adult content goes beyond drug references. In one episode, the characters visit an empty ballroom to plan a party. Benson says, "This ballroom hosted the most elegant balls in its day." Rigby asks if they were big. Benson replies, "Oh, they were huge." And if you're an adult hearing that exchange, you know exactly what just happened. In another episode, a machine is called Skis Balls, a name that's essentially a kid-friendly spelling of a very adult insult. There are references to strip clubs, drinking, and sexual innuendo scattered throughout the series, and Cartoon Network was apparently fine with all of it, at least in the early seasons. In fact, according to some accounts, the network actually directed the creative team to use more adult-oriented humor, including light vulgarity and references to alcohol. They wanted the show to appeal to an older audience. They just didn't want the word pissed. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The way Regular Show handles existential dread. Not fear of monsters or villains or death. Existential dread. The specific anxiety of being alive, having consciousness, and wondering what it all means. And it does this primarily through Pops. Pops Maillard, voiced by Sam Marin, is presented for most of the series as a naive, childlike man who speaks in an old-fashioned way and is delighted by simple things. He's the son of Mr. Maillard, the owner of the park, and he is, to put it mildly, sheltered, protected from the real world to an almost absurd degree. But in Season 8, the show peels back the curtain and reveals that everything you thought you knew about Pops was a lie. His real name is Mega Cranus. He was born on a planet called Lollyland. He is the literal embodiment of pure good, and he has a twin brother named Anti-Pops, who is the embodiment of pure evil. Their conflict has been playing out in cycles for all of existence. Every time they clash, the universe resets, over and over. An eternal loop of creation and destruction, with Pops at the center, unaware of his own cosmic significance. And here's the detail that really gets me. Mr. Maillard isn't Pops' biological father. He's his adoptive father. Mr. Maillard was a meteor fragment salesman who, during an expedition, found an asteroid containing a baby from Lollyland. He adopted the baby, named it Pops because it looked so old, and bought a local park specifically to keep his newly adopted alien son safe in a normal environment. The entire park, the setting of the entire show, exists because one man found a cosmic baby in a space rock and decided to give it a normal life. That's the true nature of the park. It's not just a workplace. It's a sanctuary, a protection spell made of grass and trees, and a house, built to keep one innocent being from discovering that his existence is the fulcrum on which the universe pivots. And when Mr. Maillard finally tells Pops the truth in the ice tape, he says that no matter what, he always thought of Pops as his real son, a meteor salesman and an alien baby, father and son. And the whole show, all 8 seasons, all 244 episodes, is the story of that baby growing up, leaving the sanctuary, and facing the destiny his father tried to protect him from. If that's not emotionally devastating, I don't know what is. And if you're lying there right now thinking, wait, regular show? The one with the talking bird and the raccoon? Yes, that one. And I want to linger on Mr. Maillard for a moment because he's a character that gets dismissed as a minor supporting player, but he's actually the linchpin of the entire narrative. Think about what he did. He found a baby in a rock from space. He didn't call the authorities. He didn't sell it to the highest bidder. He didn't run experiments on it. He adopted it. He named it Pops because it looked old, which is honestly adorable. And then he bought an entire park, not as a business investment, not as a passion project, but as a hiding place, a controlled environment where his alien son could live a normal life, surrounded by normal people doing normal things, shielded from the cosmic destiny that would eventually come calling. Every episode of regular show, every mundane day of Mordecai mowing the lawn and Rigby slacking off and Benson screaming about productivity, all of that normalcy was manufactured. It was Mr. Maillard's creation, a simulation of ordinary life, built to keep one extraordinary being safe. The park is a terrarium, a biodome for innocence, and the fact that supernatural events keep invading it, that cosmic chaos keeps breaking through the walls of normalcy, makes you wonder, was Mr. Maillard fighting a losing battle the whole time? Was the park always going to fail as a sanctuary? Were the escalations that define every episode actually the universe's way of testing the walls, looking for cracks, trying to reach Pops before he was ready? If you rewatch the show with that lens, knowing what the Season 8 reveals tell us, every single episode becomes tinged with dread. The comedy is still there. The friendships are still warm. But underneath all of it is this ticking clock. The universe knows where Pops is, and it's coming for him. Every monster of the week, every cosmic intrusion, every time the sky splits open and something impossible reaches into the park, it's the universe knocking on the door of Mr. Maillard's sanctuary. And one day, in the final season, the door opens. Let me talk about Exit 9B for a minute, because it's one of the show's most ambitious episodes, and it reveals something crucial about the show's underlying structure. Exit 9B is the Season 4 premiere, first airing on October 1st, 2012, and it's a half-hour special where every villain the park crew has ever defeated is resurrected through a portal and sent to destroy the park. The episode is essentially a clip show in reverse. Instead of replaying old footage, it brings old threats back to life. And the orchestrator of this resurrection is Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of the giant floating bearded head from High Score, who was himself a parody of real-life disgraced arcade game champion Billy Mitchell. This is a villain whose father literally exploded after Mordecai and Rigby beat his high score on an arcade game called Broken Bones. And his son, motivated by grief and revenge, has spent years engineering a plan to destroy everything the park crew cares about. The father's humiliation became the son's mission, and the vehicle for that mission is a literal portal to the underworld. The episode ends with a massive battle, a climactic victory, and the introduction of Thomas, the mild-mannered goat intern who, as we discussed, turns out to be a Russian spy 2 seasons later. But what Exit 9B reveals about the show is that its past isn't disposable. In most episodic cartoons, defeated villains are gone forever. Each episode is self-contained. The monster shows up, the heroes win, the monster vanishes, and it's never mentioned again. Regular show says no. Your past comes back. The things you thought were resolved resurface. The enemies you defeated don't stay defeated, and the consequences of your actions accumulate. That's not a cartoon rule. That's a life rule. And it's dark as hell when applied to a show where the consequences include having your soul claimed by a vengeful floating head. And the fact that the floating head was a parody of Billy Mitchell, a real person, makes the whole thing even stranger. Mitchell, the real-world arcade game champion, became infamous for disputes over his Donkey Kong records and was eventually stripped of his titles by Twin Galaxies, the organization that tracked gaming records. The guy that regular show mocked in 2011 actually became more of a villain in real life as the years went on. The parody predicted the reality. And the fact that Mitchell actually sued Cartoon Network over the character is maybe the most regular show thing to ever happen outside of regular show. A real person looked at a cartoon villain that was a giant, floating, exploding bearded head and said, "That's defamation." Sometimes satire writes itself, and sometimes the thing you're satirizing sues you for being too accurate. The Exit 9B sequel episode proved that Quintel's team wasn't afraid of the legal heat either. They brought the character back, albeit as his son, and made the stakes even bigger. The show was willing to risk real-world consequences to maintain its creative vision. That's the kind of boldness you get from a team that was raised on creative freedom and never learned to be afraid of notes. Let me talk about the Terror Tales of the Park specials, because they're where the show really let its freak flag fly. Starting in Season 3, regular show did annual Halloween specials in a Treehouse of Horror style format, which makes sense because Quintel was heavily inspired by The Simpsons. These were anthology episodes where the park crew told scary stories to each other, and because the stories weren't canon, the show could go darker than it normally would. Characters could die, permanently, violently, and the show leaned into that freedom hard. There were 6 Terror Tales specials across the show's run, one for each season from 3 through 8, and they were something Quintel was deeply passionate about. He was directly inspired by Treehouse of Horror, The Simpsons' long-running Halloween anthology series, and you can see the influence in the format. 3 stories per episode, told within a framing device, with a focus on horror tropes played both straight and for comedy. And the content in these episodes is genuinely unsettling for a children's show. Characters are killed in graphic, creative ways. Monsters aren't defeated with clever solutions, but through brute force and survival horror logic. And the framing devices themselves get progressively darker. In one of the original plans for Terror Tales of the Park 2, the ending was supposed to feature the park crew getting caught in a traffic jam and discovering that the crash ahead was their own van, their own bodies. They were already dead. Paramedics at the scene would reveal demonic, skeletal faces. A tow truck driver would show his own skull. And as Benson tries to escape the van, the door won't open, and the driver hits the gas toward a flaming portal opening in the road. That ending was cut. But the fact that it was written, storyboarded, and nearly produced tells you everything you need to know about where the creative team's minds were at. And the fact that these specials even exist tells you something about Quintel's creative ambition. Most showrunners would be happy to have a successful episodic comedy, but Quintel wanted to prove that his show could do anything. Horror? Sure. Romantic drama? Obviously. Cosmic science fiction? Absolutely. Full anime parody? Why not? Time travel war epic? Already did it in the movie. Every Terror Tales special was a flex. A reminder that regular show wasn't a comedy that occasionally tried other genres. It was an everything show that happened to be funny. And the horror episodes let the team go to places the normal episodes couldn't. They could be genuinely scary. They could be gory. They could kill main characters and not worry about continuity. And in doing so, they trained the audience to accept that this show could hurt you, that this show would hurt you, and that when the finale came and the death was permanent, you'd already been prepared for it by 6 seasons of fake deaths that felt real enough to sting. I want to take a moment to talk about something I think is genuinely brilliant about the show's narrative architecture, and that's the way it handles escalation. In most shows, when things escalate, it feels forced. Oh no, the villain is even more powerful now. But regular show built escalation into its DNA from episode 1. The very first episode, The Power, establishes the rule. Mundane actions lead to cosmic consequences. Mordecai and Rigby find a keyboard that grants wishes, and by the end of the episode, they've launched their house into space. Episode 1, House in Space. And the show never backs down from that principle. Every episode follows the same basic structure. Something normal happens. Mordecai and Rigby do something stupid. Things escalate beyond all reason. And there's a climactic confrontation that involves explosions, monsters, or reality-altering cosmic events. But what makes it work is that the show also escalates emotionally. The stakes aren't just physical. They're relational. Will Mordecai and Rigby stay friends? Will Benson fire them? Will Skips lose his immortality? The cosmic chaos is always tethered to something personal. And that's why the show works for adults. Because adults understand that the real crisis isn't the giant floating head trying to kill you. The real crisis is the fear that you're not good enough, that you've wasted your time, that the people you love will leave. Regular show wraps those fears in action sequences and monster fights, but the fears themselves are completely real. Let's talk about the giant floating head for a second, because it's actually a great example of how the show engages with real-world culture. Garrett Bobby Ferguson, the villain from High Score in Season 2, Episode 7, is a massive disembodied floating bearded head who holds the universe record on an arcade game called Broken Bones. He's a parody of Billy Mitchell, the real-world arcade game record holder who became infamous for his disputed high scores and was eventually stripped of his records by Twin Galaxies. And here's what's amazing. Billy Mitchell actually sued Cartoon Network over the character. That's right. A real person looked at a giant exploding floating head in a cartoon and said, "That's me, and I'm upset about it." The character was redesigned in later episodes as Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of the original head, who returns for revenge in Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere. But the fact that Regular Show got sued by a real-life disgraced arcade champion is possibly the most Regular Show thing that has ever happened in reality. Here's something I need to mention because it's one of the show's wildest creative swings: the Thomas twist. Thomas, voiced by Roger Craig Smith, is introduced in Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere, as a mild-mannered goat intern who joins the park crew. He's there for 2 whole seasons, just kind of hanging around, being the new guy. And then, in The Real Thomas, a Season 6 special, it's revealed that Thomas is actually a Russian spy named Nikolai. I need you to understand the audacity of that. A character who was on the show for 2 years, who fans had accepted as just another member of the group, turns out to be a sleeper agent for the Russian government. His name isn't even Thomas. His entire presence was a cover. And in the episode, when forced to choose between his mission and his friends, Nikolai double-crosses the Russian government, saves the park crew, and goes into hiding. He eventually flees to Canada, where, in a detail mentioned in a later episode, he opens a video store in Montreal that exclusively rents spy movies. That's not just a twist. That's a character assassination retroactively applied to 40-plus episodes of screen time, and then played for both drama and comedy simultaneously. And it works. I keep coming back to how much this show gets away with on a children's network, and I think the reason it gets away with it is Quintel's approach to voice acting. He insisted on a naturalistic, conversational tone for the show's dialogue. He wanted it to sound like actual people talking, not cartoon characters performing. And the cast recorded their lines together in group sessions rather than individually, which is unusual for animation. Most cartoons have actors recorded separately, and the dialogue is edited together. Regular Show had everyone in the same room, talking to each other, reacting in real time, and you can hear it. The dialogue has this looseness, this improvisational quality, that makes even the most absurd situations feel grounded. When Mordecai says something stupid, you can hear the genuine exasperation in Benson's response. When Rigby gets excited, there's an energy that comes from William Salyers actually feeding off the other actors in the room. And that approach extends to the production process. Each episode took about 9 months to complete. Quintel had a 35-member team at Cartoon Network Studios in Burbank, California. The scripts were illustrated as rough hand-drawn storyboards, then animated and mixed with dialogue to create animatics that went to the network for approval. Once approved, the assets were sent to Seiram Animation in South Korea for final animation. 9 months for an 11-minute episode. That's an extraordinary level of care for what most people dismiss as a silly cartoon. All right, I want to get into something that I've been thinking about obsessively, and that's the show's mythology. Because Regular Show, underneath the comedy and the slice of life stuff, has this incredibly complex cosmological framework that most viewers never fully appreciate. Let me try to map it out. At the top of the cosmic hierarchy, you have pops and anti-pops, representing pure good and pure evil. Their conflict is eternal and cyclical. Every time they fight, the universe either resets or is destroyed. Below them, you have the guardians of eternal youth, cosmic babies who can grant immortality. Then you have Death, the Grim Reaper, who operates as a kind of cosmic middle manager, collecting souls and enforcing the rules of mortality. Then there's Gary, another immortal being connected to the Guardians. And then you have the various one-off cosmic entities that show up throughout the series, reality warpers, dimension hoppers, interdimensional cable providers, sentient video game characters, ancient evils, and whatever the possessed British taxi is. The park sits at the center of all of this, not metaphorically, literally. The park is, as we discussed, a sanctuary built to hide Pops from his destiny, but it's also a kind of nexus point. It attracts supernatural events. Every mundane thing that happens there gets warped into something cosmic. And if you accept the fan theory that the park is essentially a dimensional thin spot, a place where the barrier between the mundane and the supernatural is weakened, then everything about the show makes sense. Of course, a keyboard can grant wishes there. Of course, death shows up for arm wrestling matches. Of course, two slackers can accidentally tear holes in the fabric of reality. The park isn't just a park. It's ground zero for cosmic instability. And everyone who works there is, knowingly or not, standing on the edge of the abyss. And while we're talking about cosmic frameworks, let me mention something about the show's relationship with technology, because it's another hidden layer that most people miss. Regular Show is set in a world where technology is both anachronistic and dangerous. The characters have cell phones sometimes, but they also use VHS tapes, cassette players, CRT televisions, and arcade cabinets. The technology of the show is deliberately unstuck in time, mixing contemporary gadgets with 80s and 90s relics. And almost every piece of technology in the show is either sentient, cursed, or capable of destroying reality. The power keyboard grants wishes. Video game characters come to life and try to kill people. A VHS tape can trap you inside it. An arcade machine's high score triggers the appearance of a cosmic entity. Even the telephone can be a gateway to other dimensions. The show's message about technology is consistent and dark. The tools we create to entertain ourselves and make our lives easier are always one step away from consuming us. Every piece of technology in Regular Show is a Pandora's box. It looks harmless. It looks fun. And then it tries to kill you. I think Quintel, who grew up in the pre-internet era and came of age during the digital revolution, was processing something very specific about how his generation's relationship with technology evolved. We went from playing Toe Jam and Earl on a Genesis to carrying supercomputers in our pockets, and nobody fully reckoned with what that transition cost us. Regular Show does that reckoning, episode by episode, by showing us a world where every tool is a trap, and every shortcut leads to an escalation. The characters keep reaching for technology to solve their problems, and the technology keeps making things worse. That's not a sci-fi premise. That's a Tuesday. There's a fan theory I want to address directly, because it's the most popular dark theory about the show, and it actually has real evidence behind it. The theory is that the events of Regular Show are an extended acid trip that never ended. The idea comes directly from 2 in the AM PM, where the characters take acid and hallucinate into Mordecai and Benson. The theory suggests that the hallucination never stopped, that the entire series is the drug trip continuing, and that's why reality keeps breaking down around Mordecai, why everyday situations become psychedelic and surreal, and why the physics of the world make no sense. It's not a supernatural park. It's a gas station. And 2 guys are still tripping. Now, I don't personally subscribe to that theory because I think it reduces the show's emotional complexity to a single punchline. But I can't deny the evidence. The show was literally born from an acid trip animation. The creator has never fully distanced the show from those origins. The surreal escalation pattern mirrors the stages of a psychedelic experience, from the initial distortion of normalcy to the full-blown dissolution of reality, to the eventual come-down, where everything returns to normal. And the fact that the show's internal logic follows dream logic rather than physical logic is consistent with a hallucinatory framework. So while I don't think Quintel intended for the show to be just a drug trip, I think he knew exactly what he was channeling. The DNA of that acid trip is woven into every escalation, every reality break, every moment where the screen fills with impossible colors and shapes and you think, wait, this is a kid's show? Let me talk about Brain Eraser for a minute because it's one of the most controversial episodes in the show's history, and it's a perfect example of how the show pushes boundaries. Brain Eraser is Season 2, Episode 10, and the plot is this. Mordecai walks into Pop's room to deliver his Mustache's monthly magazine, and accidentally sees Pops completely naked, having just gotten out of the shower. The episode then follows Mordecai as he desperately tries to get the image of Pop's genitals out of his head, eventually using a Japanese anime to overwrite the memory. The episode was refused an airing in Cartoon Network Asia Pacific due to what they called the high amount of sexual references and seizure references. It was originally banned outright in parts of Asia, but was later aired in a heavily censored version in Australia. In Latin America, the episode was extensively edited to remove the nudity through blurring, alternate footage, and reframing. Eventually, it was re-aired uncut in some regions. But the fact remains that Cartoon Network produced and aired an episode of a children's show where the central plot revolves around a character seeing another character's genitals and being traumatized by it. And the resolution involves watching anime. I'm not making a judgment call about whether this is appropriate. I'm just pointing out that Regular Show consistently operated in a space that no other children's show would dare enter. I want to take another personal tangent here because I think it's relevant. The first time I ever saw a Regular Show, I was flipping through channels late at night, couldn't sleep, and I landed on an episode midway through. I don't even remember which one, but I remember the feeling. I remember thinking, wait, what is this? This doesn't feel like a cartoon. The pacing was wrong, too slow, too conversational. Characters were just talking about nothing, and then suddenly there was an explosion, and someone was fighting a monster, and the music kicked in, and I was completely hooked. I didn't know what I was watching, but I knew I needed more of it. And I think that experience, that initial confusion that gives way to obsession, is how a lot of people discover Regular Show. You stumble into it thinking it's one thing, and then it becomes everything. And I think the show is designed that way. The first few minutes of every episode are deliberately boring, deliberately regular. They lull you into thinking nothing is going to happen, and then the floor drops out. And because you were relaxed, because you were off guard, the escalation hits you harder. It's a magic trick. Every episode is a magic trick. The setup is the misdirection, and the punchline is a portal to another dimension. Quintel understood something fundamental about audience psychology. The bigger the contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the bigger the impact of the extraordinary. And he exploited that contrast for 244 episodes, and it never stopped working. Before we go further into the friendship, I want to talk about Regular Show, the movie, which came out in 2015, because it's one of the darkest explorations of the Mordecai-Rigby dynamic, and most people either haven't seen it or don't remember the details. The movie is a time travel story, and the villain is, I need you to prepare yourself for this, a future version of Mordecai, a cybernetic, angry, world-destroying future Mordecai, who is estranged from Rigby because of a past betrayal. The setup goes like this. In the past, when Mordecai and Rigby were in high school, they played on a volleyball team. During a critical moment, a transgression occurs between them, something that fractures their friendship, and the movie traces that fracture across time. In one possible future, Mordecai becomes a literal villain, enhanced with cybernetic technology, working alongside a madman named Lord Ross, who's plotting to erase the entire timeline. Future Rigby, future Benson, future Skips, and the rest of the crew are fighting to stop him. So the movie's antagonist isn't some random cosmic threat. It's Mordecai's own worst self. It's what happens when the friendship breaks and there's nobody to pull him back from the edge. The movie involves the present-day Mordecai and Rigby traveling through time, meeting their past selves, encountering their future selves, and ultimately making a choice. They look at the future where their friendship has collapsed, where Mordecai has become a monster, and the timeline itself is at stake, and they choose to be better. They choose the friendship. They agree that no matter what happens, they won't let things deteriorate to the point where they're trying to kill each other. And that choice erases the dark future from existence. The timeline heals. The villain version of Mordecai ceases to exist. Lord Ross's plan dissolves, and two 23-year-olds go back to their regular lives, carrying the knowledge that somewhere, in some erased timeline, one of them became a monster. That's not a feel-good resolution. That's existential horror with a bow on it. The movie also connects to a real-world secret about the show's development that I find deeply compelling. The film was directed by Quintel himself and features Jason Mantzoukas and David Kuckner, both established live-action comedy actors, lending their voices to the cast. The fact that Quintel could attract that caliber of talent for a Cartoon Network movie tells you something about the show's reputation within the industry. Regular Show wasn't just popular with audiences. It was respected by professionals. People wanted to be part of it, and the movie's ambition, a full-time travel epic with multiple timeline versions of every character and genuine stakes about the nature of friendship and identity, proves that Quintel never treated the movie as a cash grab or a glorified special episode. He treated it as an opportunity to go deeper into the show's core themes. And the deepest theme of all turned out to be what happens when friendship fails. The answer: everything fails. Reality itself fails. Think about what that movie is saying. It's saying that the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby is so fundamental, so load-bearing, that if it fails, reality itself collapses. Their bond isn't just personal, it's structural. The universe needs them to be friends, and if they aren't, everything falls apart. That's an incredibly dark premise for a movie aimed at kids. Your best friendship isn't just nice to have, it's essential. And if you lose it, the consequences aren't just emotional, they're existential. And the movie also reveals something uncomfortable about Mordecai's character. The fact that his worst possible self isn't lazy or selfish or cowardly. It's violent and destructive. Without Rigby to ground him, Mordecai doesn't just drift, he becomes a weapon. The show had been hinting at this for a while, at Mordecai's capacity for anger and selfishness when he's not held in check by his friendships. The movie makes it explicit. Mordecai needs Rigby, not because Rigby makes him better, though he does, but because without Rigby, Mordecai becomes genuinely dangerous. That's a terrifying dynamic to build a friendship around. And it's completely consistent with the show's larger thesis about how ordinary people are one bad decision away from cosmic catastrophe. Let me circle back to something I touched on earlier, the Mordecai and Rigby friendship, because it's the heart of the show, and it has layers that I think get overlooked. On the surface, they're best friends who do everything together. But when you look deeper, the relationship is complicated in ways that mirror real friendships. Mordecai is taller, more socially competent, more conventionally talented. He went to art school. He's the one girls are attracted to. He's the better friend by most external measures. And Rigby knows it. The imbalance in their friendship isn't hidden. It's a source of constant tension. Mordecai occasionally lords his advantages over Rigby, and Rigby occasionally resents Mordecai for having them. There are episodes where this tension becomes genuinely uncomfortable. When Rigby decides to go back to high school, Mordecai's initial reaction isn't supportive. It's jealous, because Mordecai dropped out of art school, and seeing Rigby accomplish something he couldn't threatens his sense of identity. The better friend is suddenly the one without a diploma, and the show doesn't brush past this. It sits in the discomfort. It lets Mordecai be petty and insecure before ultimately doing the right thing. And that's what real friendship looks like. It's not always supportive. It's sometimes competitive and resentful and ugly. And the mark of a true friendship isn't the absence of those feelings, but the willingness to push through them. And in the finale, when they're separated by circumstances, when Mordecai becomes an artist and Rigby starts a family with Eileen, they drift apart. Years go by. They have different lives in different places. And then, at the 25-year reunion, they see each other again, and they're fine. They've grown. They've changed. But the friendship is still there, underneath everything. And I think that might be the most realistic portrayal of adult friendship in any animated show. Because that's what happens. You grow apart. Life gets in the way. But the connection remains, dormant but intact, waiting for the next time you're in the same room. Before we move on, I want to talk about how the show handled the end of its very first season, because it establishes a pattern that carries through the entire series. Mordecai and the Rigbys, the season 1 finale airing on November 22nd, 2010, is about Mordecai lying to Margaret about being in a band. To cover the lie, he and Rigby scramble to actually perform at an open mic night at the coffee shop. They can't play instruments. They can't sing. So they get magical future versions of themselves to help, which sounds like a solution until you realize the future selves are just enabling them to lip sync. Halfway through the performance, it becomes obvious that the music is playing without them actually doing anything. And here's the layer. The plot is basically the story of Milli Vanilli, the pop duo who became infamous for lip syncing, had their Grammy revoked, and became a cultural punchline. J.G. Quintel took a real-world scandal about artistic fraud and filtered it through the lens of two cartoon friends trying to impress a girl. But the deeper message is about authenticity. Mordecai created a false version of himself to attract Margaret. He built an identity, Mordecai and the Rigbys, that wasn't real. And the universe, being the universe of Regular Show, punished the deception in the most dramatic way possible. Mordecai declares lip syncing isn't cool, rips his shirt, and destroys the future selves. He chooses authenticity over the lie, even though the lie was working. This theme, the tension between who you pretend to be and who you actually are, runs through the entire series. Benson pretends to be just a manager when he's a legendary drummer. Muscle Man pretends to be Muscle Man when he's really Mitch. Thomas pretends to be an intern when he's a Russian spy. Pops pretends to be a naive park employee when he's a cosmic entity. And Regular Show, the show itself, pretends to be a regular show when it's anything but. Every layer of the series is wrapped in pretense. And the dark secret, the one that connects all these individual deceptions, is that pretending is how we survive. We put on masks because the truth is too heavy, too strange, too vulnerable to carry around in plain sight. Regular Show isn't just aware of this. It's structured around it. I want to talk about the show's use of music because it's one of the most distinctive elements, and it ties directly into the darker themes we're exploring. Regular Show is drenched in 80s rock and synth music. It's not just background music. It's a mood. It's a worldview. The show uses power ballads and synth-heavy instrumentals during emotional moments, turning mundane park life into something that feels epic and nostalgic simultaneously. And that's by design. Quintel was deeply influenced by 80s rock during his teenage years in Hanford, and he built that influence directly into the show's DNA. But here's the thing about 80s music in the context of a show that aired from 2010 to 2017. It's not contemporary. It's not modern. It's old. And the characters in the show, these 23-year-olds working at a park, are surrounded by the music of a generation that came before them. The show is nostalgic for something its characters are too young to have experienced firsthand. And that creates this strange temporal displacement. This feeling that the characters exist out of time, trapped between a past they romanticize and a present they can't engage with. The music becomes another expression of the show's central theme, being stuck. The characters listen to music from a decade they weren't alive for because the present doesn't have anything to offer them. And if that's not a metaphor for a certain kind of millennial ennui, I don't know what is. And there's another dimension to the music that I want to explore, which is how it functions emotionally within the show. Regular Show uses music as an emotional release valve. When things get too intense, too weird, too dark, the show often cuts to a musical montage. The music gives you permission to feel what the characters are feeling without the awkwardness of them having to say it out loud. When Mordecai is heartbroken about Margaret, the show doesn't give him a therapy session. It gives him a power ballad. When the crew is gearing up for a fight, it's not a pep talk. It's a synth-driven action track. The music does the emotional heavy lifting, so the characters don't have to be emotionally articulate, which is realistic, because most 23-year-old dudes working at a park are not emotionally articulate. They communicate through shared experiences, through actions, through the music they listen to together. Quintel understood that. He understood that for a certain type of person, putting on a song says more than any conversation could, and he built a whole show around that understanding. There's a moment in Weekend at Benson's that captures this perfectly. After the hallucinogenic Mississippi Queen sequence, after all the chaos and the comedy, there's a beat where the music takes over and the characters just exist in the moment. They're not talking. They're not fighting. They're just together. And the music tells you everything you need to know about how they feel. It's warm. It's bittersweet. It's the sound of people who don't know how to say, "I care about you," but feel it deeply. That's Regular Show's secret language. It's not dialogue. It's guitar chords and synthesizer pads. And it speaks to a generation of people who grew up unable to articulate their feelings, but absolutely drowning in them. Let me tell you about Excellent, because it's one of the best episodes of the entire series, and it's also a perfect case study in how the show weaponizes emotional stakes. Excellent is Season 3, Episode 17, and it won a Primetime Emmy Award for short format animation. A Primetime Emmy for a cartoon about eating an omelet, and it deserved it. The plot is simple. There's a diner that offers a challenge. Eat a massive omelet in under an hour, and you win a trucker hat that says, "I'm Excellent." Rigby becomes obsessed with the hat and takes the challenge. But Rigby has an allergic reaction to the eggs and falls into a coma. An actual coma, in a hospital bed. Unconscious. And Mordecai, standing over his friend's hospital bed, makes a promise. He will win that hat for Rigby. What follows is a training montage. A Rocky-style preparation sequence, where Mordecai pushes his body to its limits to eat that omelet. And the thing is, it's a hat. It's a stupid trucker hat. The stakes, objectively, are ridiculous. But the show makes you care, because the hat isn't the point. The point is that Mordecai's best friend is in a coma, and this is the only thing he can do. He can't cure the allergy. He can't wake Rigby up. But he can win the hat. And that gesture, that small, absurd, beautiful gesture, is what the whole show is about. Taking something meaningless and making it meaningful through the strength of your commitment to it. And Benson, in one of his best moments, encourages Mordecai. Not yells at him, encourages him. Because even Benson, the angry gumball machine, understands what's happening. And when Mordecai completes the challenge and has to choose the correct hat from a selection guarded by an Excellent knight, he remembers Rigby's exact description of the hat, every detail, because he was listening. He was always listening. And he wins. He gets the hat, and you feel, for a moment, like everything is going to be okay. For a show about a raccoon in a coma because of eggs. That's the power of regular show. Alright, let's go deeper. I want to talk about Muscle Man, because he might be the most misunderstood character on the show. On the surface, Mitchell Sorenstein is the comic relief. He's the green guy who takes his shirt off and makes "my mom" jokes. And those jokes are specifically constructed to be confusing. Where a normal "your mom" joke insults the listener's mother, Muscle Man's "my mom" jokes insult his own mother, which means they're functionally self-deprecating in a way that nobody around him appreciates or even understands. Only High Five Ghost laughs. Everyone else is just annoyed. And there's something genuinely sad about a person whose humor is so specific, so internally logical, that nobody around him gets the joke. But Muscle Man's story goes deeper than comedy. His real name is Mitch, and in Power Tower, it's revealed that he earned the nickname Muscle Man from his early years of bodybuilding, when he was actually in excellent physical shape. He was ripped. He was strong. And he found it incredibly boring. So he quit. He gave up the physique that defined him and let himself go, choosing a life of laziness and "my mom" jokes over discipline and achievement. That's a character who consciously rejected self-improvement because it didn't make him happy. And in a culture that's obsessed with optimization and hustle and being your best self, that's a weirdly radical stance. Muscle Man chose comfort over ambition, joy over growth, and the show never punishes him for it. He gets the girl. He gets married. He has a life. And speaking of getting the girl, let's talk about The End of Muscle Man, Season 6, Episode 5, because it's one of the show's most emotional bait and switches. The episode opens with Muscle Man telling the crew he's preparing for the end. He gives them a list of things he wants to do before it's over. Death literally shows up. Everyone thinks Muscle Man is dying. The park crew goes into full grief mode, helping him complete his final wishes, crying over the impending loss of their friend. And then the reveal. He's not dying. He's proposing to Starla. The end is the end of his bachelorhood. He wanted to do everything one last time as a single man before committing to Starla forever. But here's the layer underneath the layer. When Muscle Man proposes, he does it as Mitch Sorenstein, his real name. He's shedding the Muscle Man persona to offer his authentic self to the woman he loves. And Starla says no, not because she doesn't love him, Because she fell in love with Muscle Man, not Mitch. She doesn't want him to change. She doesn't want the real him if that means losing the person she actually fell for. And when Muscle Man puts the persona back on, she says yes. Think about what that means. The woman he loves doesn't want his authentic self. She wants the character, the performance, the guy who makes "my mom" jokes and takes his shirt off. And Muscle Man, rather than being hurt by this, is relieved. Because maybe the performance is his authentic self. Maybe Muscle Man isn't a mask Mitch wears. Maybe Mitch was the mask all along. And here's one more thing about Muscle Man that I think is the darkest detail of all, and it's hiding in plain sight. In the episode My Mom, we learn that Muscle Man's mom photo, the one he carries around and shows to people, is actually a picture of his own painted butt cheeks squished together to look like a woman's face. That's played for comedy, and it is funny. But think about what it implies about Muscle Man's actual relationship with his mother. He doesn't show people a real photo of her. He made a fake one from his own body. That's either an elaborate joke or it's a defense mechanism from someone who doesn't want to think about his real mother, who maybe has a more complicated relationship with her than the jokes let on. The show names his mother as the setup for every joke he tells, but it never lets us actually see her in a genuine context. She's always a punchline. And people who turn their pain into punchlines are the ones who are hurting the most. That's true in comedy. That's true in life. And it might be the truest thing about Mitch Sorenstein. I also need to talk about Ello Governor in more depth because I think it's one of the show's most psychologically honest episodes. Rigby watches a cheesy black and white British horror film about a possessed taxi, and he becomes so terrified that he can't sleep. He has nightmares. He's jumpy. He's paranoid. And the other characters try everything to help him get over his fear. From exposure therapy, to rational conversation, to just telling him to stop being a baby. None of it works. And then the possessed taxi from the movie actually shows up in real life and tries to kill them. Because of course it does. This is regular show. But the thing that makes this episode interesting from a psychological standpoint is that it takes anxiety seriously. Rigby's fear isn't rational. Everyone around him knows it's not rational. And yet the fear is real. It affects his behavior, his sleep, his ability to function. The show doesn't mock him for being scared. It shows the fear consuming him. And then it validates the fear by making the threat real. Which is kind of what anxiety feels like, isn't it? Everyone tells you the thing you're afraid of isn't real, isn't going to happen, is irrational. And then sometimes the thing shows up. Not always as a possessed British taxi. But the fear turns out to be justified more often than people want to admit. Regular show gets that. It understands that the line between irrational fear and justified terror is thinner than we'd like to believe. And it draws that line in every single episode. Okay, I need to take a breath here, because we've been in some heavy territory, and I want to make sure we don't lose the forest for the trees. Let me talk about something lighter before we go into what I think is the darkest stretch of the show. Let me talk about the anime episode. Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special, Season 6, is one of the most insane, creative, purely joyful things regular show ever produced. The plot involves Benson ordering Mordecai and Rigby to get rid of a cassowary in the park, which somehow spirals into a space battle involving baby ducks, geese, mech suits, and lawyers fighting over merchandising rights. It's a full-on anime parody, complete with a Japanese language opening that directly references Cruel Angel's Thesis from Neon Genesis Evangelion. The episode features giant robot battles on the moon, literal Gundam references, and it was storyboarded by Toby Jones and Owen Dennis, who poured their love of anime into every frame. This episode is important because it shows what regular show was capable of when given full creative freedom. The show could do horror. It could do romance. It could do existential drama. And it could do a full 30-minute anime parody with transforming mech suits, and it would work just as well. The range of the show is staggering, and I think that range is what made it special. You never knew what you were going to get. You might get a quiet episode about Benson's feelings, or you might get a full space opera about ducks, and both would feel completely natural within the show's framework. That's not easy to pull off. Most shows can do one thing well. Regular show could do everything well. Alright, let's go dark again. Let's talk about the finale. A regular epic final battle is the three-part series finale of Regular Show, airing on January 16th, 2017, as Season 8, Episodes 27 through 29. And I want to walk through this carefully, because it's one of the most emotionally complex endings in animation history, and it involves the permanent, non-reversible death of a main character. To understand the finale, you need to understand what Season 8 did to the show, because Season 8 is essentially a different show. It's Regular Show wearing the skin of a space opera, and it's the darkest, sustained stretch of the entire series. At the end of Season 7, the park was literally launched into space. The entire park, building, grounds, everyone on it, shot into space. Season 8 takes place almost entirely in space, with the park crew adapting to their new extraterrestrial existence while dealing with the same interpersonal dynamics they always had. But as the season progresses, the show becomes increasingly narrative-driven, building toward a confrontation that's been cosmically destined since before the universe began, and the tone shifts dramatically. The early space episodes still have comedy, still have the everyday absurdity vibe of the park, but set on a spaceship. Ugly Moons is about Muscle Man mooning their enemies from space, which is very Muscle Man. Pop's favorite planet connects to the larger mythology by revealing that the planet Pops always wanted to look at through his telescope was Lollyland, his actual homeworld, and that he gets telekinetic powers whenever it's near Earth. These early episodes feel like the show is having fun with its new setting, while slowly laying the groundwork for something much heavier. And then the mythology kicks in. Pops starts having nightmares. The crew discovers the truth about anti-Pops. The history of the universe starts to unravel. And the show that was once about two guys trying to avoid mowing the lawn becomes a show about the heat death of existence and whether love can prevent the annihilation of everything that ever was. Season 8 is, in many ways, the show finally becoming what it always secretly was. A story about the end of the world, told in 11-minute installments, disguised as a workplace comedy. Pops, the innocent lollipop man who called everyone Jolly Good Show, is revealed to be Mega Kranos, the chosen one, the embodiment of pure good. His twin brother, Anti-Pops, is the embodiment of pure evil. They've been fighting since the beginning of existence. Every time they fight, the universe is destroyed and reset. It's happened before, countless times. The entire history of Regular Show's universe is a loop, a cycle of creation and destruction hinging on two brothers who can't stop fighting. And the finale doesn't just bring back Anti-Pops. It brings back everyone. Death shows up to fight alongside the park crew. The Guardians of Eternal Youth are there. Gary is there. Every cosmic entity that the show has introduced over 8 seasons rallies to fight for the universe's survival. It's an Avengers Assemble moment, except instead of superheroes, it's cosmic babies, and the Grim Reaper, and a Yeti who skips everywhere, and a goat who used to be a Russian spy. The show's entire mythology, every bizarre one-off character, every seemingly random cosmic encounter, all of it converges in the finale. And suddenly you realize that nothing was random. Every strange thing that happened at the park was building to this moment. Every cosmic entity that wandered into Mordecai and Rigby's life was part of a larger pattern. A pattern that would eventually require all of them to stand together against the annihilation of everything. That's extraordinary storytelling. To build a world over 8 seasons that appears to be random and chaotic, and then reveal, in the final episodes, that it was all connected. That every loose thread was actually a supporting cable. That the chaos was order, seen from too close. You had to step back, way back, to see the full picture. And the full picture was always Pops, standing at the center of everything, holding the universe together with nothing but kindness. And in the finale, it happens again. Pops and Anti-Pops clash. They grow larger than planets. The universe begins to collapse. Every previous version of this fight ended with mutual destruction and a cosmic reset. But this time, Pops chooses differently. Instead of fighting to win, Pops hugs his brother. He chooses love over combat, kindness over destruction. And then, with Anti-Pops in his arms, Pops hurls both of them into a star. He sacrifices himself, permanently. No resurrection, no cosmic reset. Pops dies to break the cycle, to end the loop, to save a universe that has been destroyed and rebuilt countless times, all because two brothers couldn't stop fighting. The park crew returns to Earth after 3 years in space. They're welcomed as heroes. They build a memorial statue for Pops. They mourn him, really mourn him. And the show doesn't soften this. There's no "he's in a better place" platitude delivered with a wink. Pops is gone. The most innocent, most joyful character on the show sacrificed himself so that everyone else could live in a universe that finally, for the first time, wouldn't be reset. The finale's last shot shows Pops watching his friends' lives from what appears to be a fluffy cloud heaven, and while that's comforting, it doesn't change the fact that he's dead. He chose to die. The lollipop man with the heart of gold threw himself into a star. And here's what breaks me about this ending. The show didn't have to kill Pops. They could have found another way. They could have had him survive somehow, return to the park, go back to saying, "Jolly good show," while everyone mowed the lawn. But they chose not to. They chose to let the death be permanent, because that's what the story needed. The cycle of violence only ends when someone is willing to absorb the violence instead of reflecting it back. Pops absorbed it, all of it. And the cost was everything. I remember the first time I watched that finale. I was sitting on my couch at 2 a.m, which, incidentally, is very much the Velvo experience. And when Pops flew into that star, I just sat there. I didn't cry immediately. I felt this kind of hollowing out. This emptiness, like the show had scooped something out of me. And then I thought about Mr. Maillard, the man who found a cosmic baby in an asteroid and built an entire park to keep him safe. And all of it, all the groundskeeping and the managers and the slackers and the cosmic escalations, all of it was in service of protecting one being from a destiny that would eventually require his death. Mr. Maillard built a world for his son, and his son left that world to save a universe. Regular Show is about a lot of things, but at its core, in its final moments, it's about a father's love and a son's sacrifice. And that's not a cartoon. That's mythology. Let me sit with the aftermath of the finale for a moment, because the show doesn't just kill Pops and roll credits. It shows you what happens after. And what happens after is life. Regular, mundane, beautiful life. The flash forward shows the characters 25 years later. Mordecai became an artist. He met Steph at a gallery. They have 3 kids. Rigby married Eileen. They have 2 daughters. Muscleman and Starla presumably stayed together. Benson is still at the park. Or at least, he's still around. The park workers who spent the entire series being stuck finally moved on. They grew up. They changed. And the show presents this not as a triumph, but as a gentle inevitability. Time passes. People grow. The park stays the same, but the people don't. And Skips? Skips is still there. Still immortal. Still skipping. Everyone else got to change. Got to age. Got to have families and careers and lives. Skips stays. Skipping for Mona. Forever. That's not a happy ending for Skips. That's a sentence. An eternal sentence served in 11-minute installments across 244 episodes. There's a meta quality to the finale that I want to address. Regular Show ended on January 16th, 2017, after 8 seasons and 244 episodes. It won a Primetime Emmy for Eggcellent. It was nominated for 6 Emmys total. It won 7 Annie Awards and 3 British Academy Children's Awards. It ran for 6.5 years. And for the final season, Quintel took the show into space, which is the ultimate escalation. The show that started with 2 guys on a couch ended with the entire cast orbiting the Earth. And I think that escalation was itself a kind of meta-commentary. The show is about how mundane things become extraordinary. And the production of the show followed the same trajectory. A college student's acid trip animation became an Emmy-winning Cartoon Network series that ended with the death of a cosmic being inside a star. That's not just escalation. That's ascension. I want to loop back. And yes, that's a deliberate word choice, given what we've been discussing. I want to loop back to the censorship issue, because there's a dimension of it we haven't explored. International censorship of Regular Show is wild when you start compiling the data. In the UK, entire scenes were reanimated with different mouth movements to match sanitized dialogue. In Australia, episodes were edited for violence, and Brain Eraser was initially refused broadcast entirely. In Latin America, censorship was extensive enough to warrant its own wiki page. In the Philippines, episodes were cut or banned. In Asia Pacific, specific episodes were refused airing due to sexual references, seizure risk content, and general inappropriateness for the target demographic. But here's what strikes me about all of this. The censorship was always reactive, not proactive. Cartoon Network approved these episodes. They went through the full 9-month production pipeline. They were animated, voiced, scored, edited, and shipped. And then, when they aired in different countries and different cultural contexts objected, they were censored after the fact, which means the content wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. The creative team deliberately pushed the boundaries, got the content approved by the US network, and let international censors deal with the fallout. That's not accidental boundary pushing. That's strategic. Quintel and his team knew exactly how far they could go, and they went there, and then they let the system sort it out. And I think there's something to be said about the cultural specificity of what different countries found objectionable. The US censored profanity, but was fine with death and cosmic horror. The UK censored violence and death, but was fine with most of the innuendo. Latin America censored nudity, but was more permissive with language. Each culture has its own hierarchy of what's acceptable for children, and Regular Show, by being so varied in its inappropriateness, managed to offend everyone equally. It's almost admirable. Here's another tangent. I spent 3 hours last week reading the Regular Show wiki page on censorship. 3 hours. And at one point, my partner walked in and asked what I was doing, and I said, researching the geopolitical implications of a cartoon about a raccoon. And she stared at me for a very long time and then left the room. And I think that interaction perfectly captures the Regular Show experience. It looks stupid from the outside, but once you're really in, you realize there's a whole world underneath the surface, and you can't stop digging. That's the show's power. It tricks you into thinking it's nothing, and then it reveals everything. And once you've seen it, once you've really seen what the show is doing underneath the surface, you can't unsee it. You try to watch casually. You try to just enjoy the comedy. But your brain keeps pulling at threads and finding new connections and noticing details you missed the first time, the second time, the fifth time. It's a show that rewards obsession. And I say that as someone who is currently deep in the obsession and showing no signs of recovery. And here's a detail I almost forgot to mention that exemplifies how thorough the show's world building is. William Salyers, the actor who voices Rigby, had a long career in live-action television before joining Regular Show. He did Northern Exposure, Medicine Ball, Pandora's Clock, and then in the early 2000s, he transitioned to voice acting and suddenly became Rigby, this hyperactive raccoon who screams and panics and gets into fights with arcade machines. Salyers brings a quality to Rigby that a younger, less experienced actor probably couldn't. A kind of world weariness underneath the frenetic energy. When Rigby is scared, you can hear genuine fear. When he's sad, there's actual weight to it. The voice acting in this show doesn't get enough credit. Every performance is calibrated to exist on multiple emotional registers simultaneously. Funny on the surface, poignant underneath. And that dual register is what makes the show work for both kids and adults. Kids hear the jokes. Adults hear the pain. And both audiences leave satisfied, thinking they watched the same show, when really, they watched two different shows, wearing the same animation. Let me talk about J.G. Quintel's creative philosophy, because I think it explains why the show works on so many levels. Quintel has said in interviews that he wanted Regular Show to sound natural, to provide contrast to most cartoons, which he felt were difficult for adults to listen to. He wasn't interested in broad, exaggerated voice acting. He wanted conversations. He wanted pauses. He wanted the characters to sound like actual people in actual rooms having actual discussions about nothing, and then having those discussions interrupted by supernatural catastrophe. And that philosophy extended to every aspect of production. The voice recording sessions were group affairs, with the whole cast in one room. That's almost unheard of in animation, where typically each actor records their lines in isolation and the dialogue is stitched together in post-production. But Quintel insisted on having everyone together. Sam Marin doing Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man. William Salyers doing Rigby. Quintel himself doing Mordecai and High Five Ghost. Mark Hamill doing Skips. All in the same room, playing off each other's energy, reacting to each other's delivery in real time. And you can hear the results. There are moments in the show where the dialogue overlaps slightly, where someone starts talking before the other person finishes, where a reaction comes half a beat early or late. Those aren't mistakes. Those are artifacts of genuine conversation, and they make the show feel alive in a way that most cartoons can't achieve. And here's the thing about how much physical comedy the show packs into its voice performances. Marin, in particular, has to perform 3 distinct characters with wildly different vocal registers and physical energies. Benson is tightly wound, controlled, perpetually on the verge of eruption. Pops is airy, delicate, floating above the ground even in his voice. Muscle Man is loud, brash, perpetually performing, and Marin switches between all 3, sometimes in the same scene, sometimes in the same conversation. The fact that one actor voices the angry boss, the naive optimist, and the crude jokester, and makes all 3 feel like completely different people, is a level of vocal performance that doesn't get talked about enough. Marin left Disney for this, and listening to him work, you understand why. He wasn't just voicing characters, he was creating people, and that contrast is the key to the show. The mundane grounding makes the escalation hit harder. If the characters talked like cartoon characters, the cosmic stuff would feel expected. But because they talk like real people, the cosmic stuff feels genuinely shocking every time. Even after 244 episodes, you never get desensitized to the escalation because the baseline is always so relatable. We need to do our jobs. I don't want to do our jobs. Let's find a way to not do our jobs. And then a portal to another dimension opens in the middle of the park. The show earns its insanity by starting from a place of total banality. And speaking of starting from banality, I think it's important to acknowledge something about how the show uses repetition as a narrative tool, because it connects to the darker themes we've been discussing. Every episode of regular show follows the same basic template: normal situation, escalation, climax, resolution. And over 244 episodes, that pattern never changes. It's a loop, a cycle. And what did we learn about cycles from the show's mythology? Pops and anti-pops have been fighting in a cycle since the beginning of existence. The universe gets destroyed and resets, again and again. The same pattern, forever. The episode structure is the cosmic structure. The show isn't just telling a story about a cyclical universe. It's embodying the cycle in its own format. Every episode is a mini-universe. It begins, escalates, climaxes, and resets to the status quo, just like the Pops and anti-Pops cycle. The characters go through chaos and then return to normalcy, and the next episode, they do it again. And they never learn. They never break the pattern. Mordecai and Rigby never stop slacking off. Benson never stops yelling. The escalations never stop escalating. Until the finale, when Pops breaks the cycle by sacrificing himself. The entire series is a structural metaphor for the universe it contains. And the finale, where the cycle is finally broken, is also the end of the show itself. The pattern stops because the show stops. Pops dies, and the episodes end. The cosmic cycle and the episodic cycle are broken simultaneously. That's either a coincidence or it's the most ambitious structural metaphor in animation history. And given what we know about Quintel, given the level of intentionality he brought to everything from the character designs to the voice recording process to the placement of 420 on background clocks, I don't think it's a coincidence. I want to talk about one more character before we head into the final stretch, and that's High Five Ghost. Because High Five Ghost is maybe the most underserved character on the show, and yet his presence says something important. He's a ghost, a literal ghost. He died at some point, and now he exists as a spectral being who high-fives people. And the show never, in 8 seasons, fully explains how he died or why he's a ghost. He just is. He works at the park. He hangs out with Muscle Man. He has a brother named Low-Five Ghost and a father who appears in a few episodes. But his actual death, the event that turned him from a living being into a ghost, never addressed. And I think that's deliberate, because High-Five Ghost is the show's reminder that death is always present, even in moments of joy. He high-fives people. That's his thing. He makes physical contact. He celebrates small victories. And he does it as someone who is technically dead. Every high five is a dead man's hand touching the living. That's dark. And nobody in the show acknowledges it, because nobody in the show needs to. Death is normalized. It's just there, high-fiving Muscle Man, hanging out at the park, being part of the group. Regular show doesn't treat death as an aberration. It treats death as a coworker. And you know what? I want to take a brief tangent about High-Five Ghost's personal life, because the show gives him one quiet, beautiful episode that most people forget. In the postcard, High-Five Ghost meets a woman named Celia at a coffee shop, and they have this instant, genuine connection. They realize they have so much in common. But Celia has to leave for Prague to finish her studies, and instead of exchanging numbers or emails, they agree to communicate by postcard. She'll send one when she's ready, and then 4 years pass. 4 years of High-Five Ghost carrying around the memory of a connection that might have been everything, or might have been nothing, waiting for a postcard from a woman in another country. And when the postcard finally arrives, he can't read it. The handwriting is illegible, or the language is wrong, or something has degraded, and the message is lost. So he gives up. He goes back to the coffee shop where they met, defeated. And guess who's there? Celia. She came back. They find each other again. That episode is a love story told in 11 minutes about a ghost and a woman, and it's more romantic than most feature films. Because it's about faith. The faith that someone out there remembers you. The faith that a connection, even a brief one, can survive distance, and time, and silence. High-Five Ghost waited 4 years on the possibility of a postcard. That's not casual interest. That's devotion. That's a dead man who still has enough heart to believe in something. And the show buries this story in the middle of a season, doesn't make a big deal about it, and moves on. But if you're paying attention, it's one of the most human things the show ever did. Because hope is a haunting too. And High-Five Ghost, more than anyone on the show, knows what it means to be haunted. Speaking of death being normalized, let me talk about the way the show handles violence. Because regular show is genuinely violent in ways that most people don't register, because the animation style softens the impact. Characters are punched, kicked, thrown, crushed, burned, electrocuted, and killed with a frequency that would be horrifying in live action. In Over the Top alone, Rigby is killed by Skips, and the solution involves arm wrestling the Grim Reaper. In Excellent, Rigby falls into a coma from an allergic reaction. In various Terror Tales episodes, characters are murdered in increasingly creative ways. In the finale, a main character is incinerated inside a star. And there's something uniquely disturbing about the show's habit of casual resurrection. Characters die and come back so frequently in regular show that death starts to feel weightless. And I think the show is aware of this. I think it deliberately conditions the audience to treat death as reversible, as a temporary inconvenience, so that when death is finally permanent in the finale, the impact is devastating. You've been trained for 7 seasons to believe that death doesn't stick, that there's always a way back. An arm wrestling match, a cosmic intervention, a loophole, and then Pops flies into a star and there's no loophole. There's no arm wrestling match. There's no cosmic baby to grant a second chance. He's just gone. And the grief hits harder precisely because you weren't expecting it. You thought you were in a show where death was a joke. And suddenly, you're in a show where death is the punchline to a joke that took 8 seasons to deliver. And it's not funny at all. The show gets away with this because the art style is soft and cartoony. The violence doesn't look violent. A character getting punched in regular show looks like a character getting punched in a Chuck Jones cartoon. There's no blood. There's no graphic detail. But the narrative consequences are real. When Rigby is in a coma, the show treats it as a coma. When Pops dies, he stays dead. The visual softness is a Trojan horse. It lets the show deliver genuinely dark content to a children's audience without triggering the alarm bells that realistic violence would. And that's not a criticism. It's a design choice. And it's a brilliant one. And this connects to something broader about the Cartoon Network era that regular show occupied. The show debuted in 2010 during a golden age of animated television that included Adventure Time, which premiered 3 months earlier, Steven Universe, which started in 2013, and Gravity Falls on Disney Channel, which debuted in 2012. All of these shows shared a common DNA. They looked like kids' cartoons, but operated on multiple levels, with complex mythologies, genuine emotional depth, and content that was designed to work differently for different age groups. Regular Show was part of a movement, a generation of animators who had grown up on The Simpsons, and Beavis, and Butthead, and Ren and Stimpy, and who believed that animation could be art, capital A art, capital A, not just entertainment, not just babysitting, art. And of all the shows in that golden age, I would argue Regular Show was the most subversive. Adventure Time was openly weird from the start. Steven Universe wore its emotions on its sleeve. Gravity Falls announced itself as a mystery show. But Regular Show hid. It disguised itself as the most basic possible premise. 2 dudes at a park, and then slowly, over 8 seasons, revealed itself to be one of the most complex, emotionally layered, philosophically ambitious things any network had ever produced for a young audience. The other shows were openly brilliant. Regular Show was secretly brilliant. And I think that makes it more impressive, not less. Because it earned its audience's trust by being funny first and deep second. It never asked you to take it seriously. And then it broke your heart. And you took it seriously whether you wanted to or not. I need to circle back to something about the show's relationship with its audience, because I think there's a dark secret hiding here too. Regular Show premiered on September 6th, 2010, and ended on January 16th, 2017. That's a little over 6 years. And the kids who were 12 when the show started were 18 when it ended. They grew up with Mordecai and Rigby. And here's the dark part. They outgrew them. Because Mordecai and Rigby never age. They're 23 for the entire run. The audience gets older, gets jobs, goes to college, starts relationships. But Mordecai and Rigby stay stuck. And at some point, the viewer looks at these 2 slackers who refuse to grow up and realizes that they're watching their own fear made manifest. The fear of getting stuck. The fear of being 23 forever while the world moves on without you. The show that once felt like a mirror becomes a warning. Don't be like these guys. Don't stay at the park. Don't stop growing. And then the finale gives the characters what the audience was already experiencing. Growth, change, time passing. The flash forward says, relax. They got out. They grew up. You're allowed to grow up too. The show gives its audience permission to move on by showing its characters moving on. And that's generous storytelling. That's a creator who loves his audience enough to tell them it's okay to leave. But also, I want to acknowledge something that the show gets wrong, or at least something it struggles with, because no show is perfect, and I think pretending otherwise does a disservice to the conversation. The show's treatment of its female characters is uneven. Margaret starts as a love interest with minimal characterization beyond Mordecai likes her. She gets more depth over time, especially when she leaves for college. But for the first few seasons, she's primarily defined by her relationship to Mordecai. CJ is better developed, more dynamic, more clearly her own person, but she's also ultimately defined by the love triangle. Eileen fares the best, honestly, because her character is allowed to exist independent of Rigby's romantic interest. She has ambitions, intelligence, agency, but even she is introduced as the friend of the girl Mordecai likes. This isn't unique to Regular Show. It's a pervasive issue in animated comedies aimed at young male audiences. But I'm bringing it up in a video about the show's dark secrets, because the way a show treats its female characters reveals something about its worldview. Regular Show is, fundamentally, a show about male friendship. And the women in the show exist primarily in relation to that friendship, as love interests, as motivators, as sources of conflict between the male leads. The show knows how to write complex, multi-layered male characters. It knows how to give them trauma and growth and contradiction and nuance. But it doesn't always extend that same care to its female characters. And that's a blind spot. A real one. Not a damning one, but a real one. Alright, we need to talk about Close Enough, because it's the epilogue to the regular show story, even though it's technically a different series. After regular show ended in 2017, Quintel created Close Enough, an adult animated sitcom that was originally pitched to TBS. After various delays and production setbacks, it premiered on HBO Max on July 9th, 2020. Close Enough follows the same basic Quintel formula: mundane premise, surreal escalation, emotional grounding, but it's explicitly for adults. The characters are in their 30s instead of their 20s. They're married with a kid. They deal with parenthood, mortgages, and aging. And the show uses that premise to explore the anxieties of being an adult in a way that regular show could only hint at. Close Enough lasted 3 seasons before HBO Max canceled it in July 2022, and then removed it from the platform entirely the following month. It was available on Netflix internationally until May 2023, and then it was just gone. A show by one of the most acclaimed animators working today, with a perfect first season rating on Rotten Tomatoes, just erased from streaming entirely. And the reason matters. It wasn't canceled because people didn't like it. It was canceled because of corporate restructuring at Warner Bros. Discovery. A business decision, not a creative one, which feels, once again, very regular show. The mundane machinations of corporate reality destroying something creative and vital. But here's the thing that excites me, and this is actually breaking news as of the last year. Regular show is coming back. Regular show, The Lost Tapes, was announced at the Annecy Animation Film Festival in 2024, with J.G. Quintel returning as showrunner. It's set to premiere on May 11th, 2026, on Cartoon Network, running for 44 episodes. The original cast is returning. Mark Hamill is back as Skips, the whole crew. And the title, The Lost Tapes, suggests that rather than continuing the story past the finale, the show will present episodes that exist within the original timeline, stories we never got to see, which is a clever way to bring the show back without undermining Pop's sacrifice or the emotional weight of the original ending. And I need to acknowledge something about Close Enough's cancellation that is, to me, one of the darkest real-world secrets behind the regular show story. Quintel spent years making Close Enough. It was delayed, reworked, and bounced between networks before finally finding a home on HBO Max. It premiered. It was loved. Critics praised it. The audience grew. And then Warner Bros. Discovery, in one of the most widely criticized corporate decisions in streaming history, purged content from the platform to cut costs and receive tax write-offs. Close Enough wasn't just canceled. It was erased, removed from the platform entirely, the digital equivalent of burning the tapes. Quintel's second major creative work was essentially deleted from existence by accountants who needed a line item to balance a spreadsheet. If that doesn't make you angry, I don't think you're paying attention. Because this is what happens to art in the streaming era. It exists at the pleasure of corporations. It can be unmade. And the creator, the person who spent years building something meaningful, has no recourse. Quintel went through this after spending a decade at Cartoon Network, where he had creative freedom and support, and then entered the streaming world where his work could be deleted by people who'd never watched a single episode. That's not a dark secret of regular show. That's a dark secret of the entertainment industry. And it's the reason the regular show revival feels so important. It's Quintel going back to the place that valued his work, going home to the network that said, "Great, make it," without notes, going back to the park. I'm cautiously optimistic about this. On one hand, the original ending was perfect. Pops died. The characters moved on. There was closure. On the other hand, the idea of lost episodes, of filling in gaps in a story we already love, is incredibly appealing. And with Quintel at the helm, I trust the creative integrity. But part of me, a small, protective part, hopes they don't go too far. Some things are beautiful because they ended. Some stories are better with gaps, and Regular Show, for all its cosmic ambition, was always at its best when it was about two friends sitting on a couch, doing nothing, and letting the universe come to them. I want to address something that's been running underneath everything we've discussed tonight. Regular Show is, by any objective measure, one of the darkest animated series to ever air on a children's network, and it managed to be dark without ever being cynical. That's the trick. That's the thing that makes it work. The show looks at death, loss, failure, existential dread, cosmic horror, and the futility of ambition. And it says, yeah, all of that's real. And also, here's two guys trying to win a hat, and it matters. The darkness isn't the point. The light that exists alongside the darkness is the point. Pops dies, and the universe survives. Benson was betrayed, and he still shows up to work. Skips lost the love of his life, and he still skips. Every day. Forever. And I think that's why the show endures. It's not because of the action sequences, or the cosmic mythology, or the drug references, or the censored profanity. It endures because it tells the truth about what it's like to be alive. Being alive is mundane and insane simultaneously. It's boring until it's terrifying. It's meaningless until it's everything. It's regular until it isn't. And then it's regular again. And then it isn't. And the cycle continues, like pops and anti-pops, like the universe itself. Creation, destruction, renewal, over and over, until someone chooses to break the pattern, until someone chooses love. And there's one more secret I want to share before we wrap up, and it's about the Pops we saw throughout the show versus the Pops who was always there underneath. For 7 seasons, Pops is comedy. He's the naive guy who says jolly good show and gets confused by modern technology and speaks in a genteel British accent that makes everything he says sound like it's from 1910. He's the comic relief's comic relief. The character you laugh at affectionately because he's so pure, so untouched by cynicism, so fundamentally good. And then season 8 reveals that his goodness isn't a character trait. It's a cosmic designation. He's literally the embodiment of pure good. His innocence isn't naivety. It's divine. And suddenly, every funny moment with Pops becomes tinged with sadness. Because you know where it's going. You know the innocent man is destined to die. You know the laughter is temporary. And rewatching the show with that knowledge transforms it completely. Every Pops moment becomes a countdown. Every jolly good show is one fewer jolly good show before the last one. And the last one, the one he says before he flies into the star, carries the weight of 244 episodes of joy and 8 seasons of innocence. That's the dark secret of Pops. He was always going to die. The show was always building to his sacrifice. And the comedy was the camouflage. It was the distraction. It was Mr. Maillard's park, scaled to the narrative level. Quintel built 7 seasons of normalcy around Pops to protect the audience from the truth, the same way Mr. Maillard built a park to protect Pops from his. And when the truth finally came, it was devastating because we weren't prepared. We thought we were watching a comedy about a lollipop man. We were watching a tragedy about a god who chose to be mortal. You know, when I started researching this video, I thought I was going to make something about a funny cartoon that had some dark stuff hidden in it. Hey, did you know Regular Show came from an acid trip? Crazy, right? But the deeper I went, the more I realized that Regular Show isn't a funny cartoon with dark stuff hidden in it. It's a dark story told through the language of comedy. The darkness isn't hidden. It's the foundation. J.G. Quintel grew up in a flat town with nothing to do. He made films about acid trips and naive men from candy planets. He got a job at Cartoon Network and spent 7 years telling stories about 2 friends who are stuck, who can't move forward, who watch the world explode around them and then go back to doing nothing. And underneath all of it, underneath the arm wrestling with death and the cosmic babies and the hot dog eating contest for your soul, there's this quiet, persistent question. Is this all there is? And the show's answer, delivered over 244 episodes and 1 devastating finale, is yes, this is all there is. And it's enough. It's enough because you're here. It's enough because your friends are here. It's enough because someone built a park for you and called you son, even though you fell from the sky. It's enough because the hat says, I'm excellent, and your best friend won it for you while you were in a coma. Let me talk about something I haven't mentioned yet, because it's one of the smaller details that haunts me the most. In the series finale's flash forward, Mordecai has become a successful artist. He paints. He shows his work in galleries. And that means Mordecai, who dropped out of art school, eventually found his way back to art. Not through school, not through a traditional path, but through life. Through working at a park and fighting cosmic entities and losing the girl and finding a new one and growing up and growing out. His art education was regular show itself. Every mundane day that escalated into madness was a lesson. Every friendship, tested and preserved, was material. And when he finally puts brush to canvas, he has something to paint. He has a life's worth of impossible experiences to draw from. Literally. And I want to point out something about the symmetry of Mordecai's ending that I think is beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Mordecai started the show as an art school dropout. He left the creative path because he wasn't ready. He took a nothing job at a park and spent years doing nothing productive. And then, at the end of the series, after the park goes to space and Pops dies and the universe is saved and everyone comes home, Mordecai goes back to art. He goes back to the thing he left. But he goes back as a different person. A person who has lived. A person who has lost. A person who watched his friend sacrifice himself to save existence. And that lived experience is what gives his art meaning. Mordecai couldn't be an artist at 23 because he had nothing to say. He becomes an artist at whatever age he is in the flash forward, because now he has everything to say. He has 8 seasons of material, and so does Quintel. Because isn't that exactly what happened to Quintel? He went to CalArts, made his weird shorts, bounced around, worked dead-end jobs, hung out with friends, made inside jokes, and then turned all of it into art, into regular show. Mordecai's path is Quintel's path. The park is, CalArts is Hanford, is every place you've ever been that felt like nothing, but was actually everything. The dark secret isn't that regular show is autobiography. The dark secret is that the autobiography has a happy ending, but only if you're patient enough to wait for it. That detail haunts me, because it means Mordecai's art is informed by his experiences at the park. It means every impossible thing he saw, every cosmic battle, every escalation from the mundane to the insane, became fuel for his creative work. The park wasn't just a dead-end job. It was an art education. The most unconventional, dangerous, cosmically volatile art education imaginable, but an art education nonetheless. All those years of seeming stagnation, all those years of slacking off and getting into trouble and fighting monsters were actually preparation. He just didn't know it at the time. And that feels like the most personal detail Quintel ever put in the show, because Quintel himself didn't take a traditional path. He bounced around colleges. He made weird shorts about acid trips and Candymen. He pitched a storyboard to Craig McCracken because he knew his idea was too weird to explain with words. And out of that unconventional path came one of the most successful animated series of its generation. Mordecai's art career isn't just a character resolution. It's Quintel looking in a mirror and saying, the weird path worked. The long way around was the right way around. And if you're lying there right now at 2 a.m, wondering if your own weird path is going anywhere, I think that's the message regular show wants you to hear. It's going somewhere. You just can't see it yet. But someone is building a park for you, and when you're ready, you'll know. Let me talk about one last dark detail, one last secret hiding in plain sight. Let me come back to something I said at the very beginning of tonight. I said that the acid trip that J.G. Quintel animated for a college project became the origin story of regular show. And now, after everything we've discussed, I want to complicate that statement. Because 2 in the AM PM isn't just the origin of the character designs. It's the origin of the show's entire philosophy. An acid trip is, at its core, an experience where ordinary reality reveals itself to be extraordinary. The walls breathe. The colors shift. The mundane world peels back and shows you something underneath. Something terrifying and beautiful and incomprehensible. And that's exactly what regular show does in every single episode. The ordinary world peels back. The mundane reveals the cosmic. The regular becomes irregular. Quintel took the core experience of a psychedelic trip, the dissolution of the boundary between the normal and the impossible, and turned it into a narrative structure. Every episode is a micro trip. Every escalation is a peak. Every return to normalcy is a come down. The show is one long acid trip, not because the characters are hallucinating, but because the show itself operates on psychedelic principles. It sees through the surface of things. It finds the extraordinary hiding inside the ordinary. And it shows you that the boundary between the two was always an illusion. The show is called Regular Show. That's the title. Regular. And yet nothing about the show is regular. Every episode features supernatural events. The characters are anthropomorphic animals and sentient objects. The laws of physics are suggestions at best. So why call it Regular Show? Because that's the joke. That's the deepest, most persistent joke in the entire series. The title is ironic. It's a show about how extraordinary things happen to ordinary people, and how ordinary people learn to treat extraordinary things as ordinary. Death shows up to bowl? Regular. The park goes to space? Regular. Your boss is a gumball machine who used to be a rock star? Regular. The title is the show's thesis statement. Life is insane, and insanity, given enough time, becomes regular. We normalize everything. We adapt to everything. The cosmic becomes mundane because we need it to be mundane in order to function. And that's the darkest thing about Regular Show. Not the acid trips, or the censored profanity, or the dead lollipop man. The darkest thing is the suggestion that we are all already living in a regular show. That our lives are full of impossible, terrifying, beautiful things that we've stopped noticing because we've classified them as regular. The sunrise is a nuclear explosion millions of miles away that you watch while eating cereal. Consciousness is the universe experiencing itself through a meat puppet that gets scared of emails. Love is two chemical systems deciding to share resources in a void that doesn't care about either of them. And we call all of this regular. We call it a regular morning, a regular day, a regular life. And that, I think, is the final dark secret, the darkest one. The one that Regular Show whispers to you at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep. That everything, absolutely everything, is extraordinary. And the only thing stopping you from seeing it is the label regular that you've slapped on your life. J.G. Quintel saw that. He saw it in a flat town in California. He saw it in a gas station during the graveyard shift. He saw it in an acid trip at Cal Arts, and he made a show about it. He made a show where a blue jay and a raccoon live in the exact kind of regular, boring, nothing life that most of us live. And then the sky opens up and monsters pour out and the universe hangs in the balance. And then everything goes back to normal. Because that's what life is. Regular Show isn't a metaphor for life. It is life. With better music and a talking gumball machine. I want to come back to where we started. The acid trip. 2 a.m. p.m. Two guys at a gas station. One of them eats candy laced with LSD. He hallucinates into a blue jay. His friend becomes a gumball machine, and the trip never really ends. Not because the show is a drug hallucination, but because the sensibility of that short, the willingness to see the mundane world dissolve into something surreal and terrifying and beautiful, permeates every frame of Regular Show. Quintel's first creative instinct was to show what happens when ordinary reality breaks down, and he spent 7 years and 244 episodes exploring that instinct. From a CalArts thesis film, to an Emmy-winning Cartoon Network series, to a legacy that's now being revived for a new generation. All from a gas station. All from acid candy. All from two friends with nothing to do. And here's one last thing that I can't stop thinking about. Regular Show. The Lost Tapes premieres on May 11th, 2026. 44 new episodes. The original cast. J.G. Quintel at the helm. And the conceit is that these are stories from within the original timeline. Episodes that exist in the gaps between the ones we saw. Which means somewhere, in some recording booth in Burbank, Sam Marin is doing the Pops voice again. He's saying, "Jolly good show," again. And he's doing it for a character he knows is dead. A character whose death he himself performed. The actor is resurrecting the voice of a character who sacrificed himself to save the universe. To tell stories that happened before the sacrifice. Stories where Pops is still alive. Still innocent. Still blissfully unaware of what's coming. That's beautiful. And it's gutting. Every new pop scene in the Lost Tapes will be a moment of grace. A borrowed afternoon in the sanctuary. A last visit to the park before the park goes to space and Pops goes to the stars. I don't know if the revival will be good. I hope it is. I trust Quintel. I trust the team. But even if it's just okay, even if it doesn't recapture the original magic, the act of making it means something. It means the park is still there. It means the stories didn't end when the credits rolled. It means the sanctuary holds, even after the person it was built for is gone. There's a moment in the finale, right before Pops flies into the star, where he looks at his friends one last time. He doesn't say anything profound. He doesn't deliver a speech. He just looks at them. And in that look is everything the show ever was. Gratitude, love, the recognition that these ridiculous, flawed, stuck, beautiful people were worth dying for, worth breaking the cosmic cycle for, worth ending an eternal war for. Not because they were special, not because they were chosen or destined or exceptional, but because they were his friends. And they were there, at the park, doing nothing, together. And that's what I keep coming back to. In a show full of secrets and censored episodes and acid trips and cosmic babies and Russian spy goats and drum solos and haunted taxis and arm wrestling death for a raccoon's soul, the biggest secret, the one hiding in the most plain sight of all, is that the show is a love letter to friendship, to showing up, to being there for the people who need you, even when being there means eating a giant omelet or fighting an intergalactic war, or just sitting on a couch watching TV. The dark secrets of regular show aren't really dark. They're just honest. And honesty, when you're not used to it, can feel like darkness. But it's not. It's light. It's the light you see when you stop looking at the surface and start looking at what's underneath. I think about Skips, still skipping after centuries. I think about Benson, still showing up to a job that's beneath him. I think about Rigby, going back to school because he wanted to be better. I think about Mordecai, painting in a gallery, married to someone he met after letting go of everything he thought he wanted. I think about Muscle Man, choosing comfort over ambition and being happier for it. I think about High Five Ghost, a dead man celebrating small victories with the living. And I think about Pops, always Pops, the naive man from Lollyland, the cosmic baby found in an asteroid, the chosen one who chose love. And I think about Eileen and Rigby, sitting at that 25-year reunion with their daughters, the dropout and the overachiever, the raccoon and the mole, together after all of it. And I think about how many people dismissed their relationship early on as filler, as a B-plot, as a consolation prize, because the Margaret thing didn't work out. But Eileen and Rigby were the real love story all along. Quiet, patient, built on mutual respect and complementary growth. Eileen made Rigby want to be better without ever demanding that he change. And Rigby loved Eileen without ever trying to be someone he wasn't. That's the healthiest relationship in the show, maybe in all of Cartoon Network's history. And it gets about 1/10 of the attention that the Mordecai-Margaret drama gets. Because drama is louder than love, but love lasts longer. And I think about J.G. Quintel, sitting in a flat town in California with nothing to do, picking up a camera and deciding to make something, anything. And that decision leading to CalArts, leading to an acid trip cartoon, leading to Cartoon Network, leading to a show that would run for 8 seasons and touch millions of lives and end with a lollipop man flying into a star. The biggest dark secret behind regular show isn't in the cut content or the censored episodes or the banned broadcasts. It's in the origin. It's in the fact that one bored kid in Hanford, California, decided to create something. And that act of creation cascaded outward into a universe of meaning. That's not regular. That's extraordinary. And maybe that's the whole point. There's a line from the show that I keep coming back to, and I'll paraphrase it because the exact words matter less than the feeling behind them. In one of the later episodes, when things are getting heavy and the crew is facing a threat they might not survive, someone says something to the effect of, "It doesn't matter what happens as long as we're together." And I know that sounds like a generic friendship platitude, the kind of thing you'd put on a poster with a sunset behind it. But in the context of regular show, in the context of everything we've discussed tonight, It's not generic at all. It's hard-won. These characters have seen each other die. They've gambled with each other's souls. They've fought cosmic battles and faced existential threats and survived things that would break most relationships. And after all of that, the conclusion isn't some grand philosophical revelation. It's just, stay together, keep showing up, be there. That's enough. And I think about all the nights I've spent lying awake, staring at the ceiling, worrying about whether I'm doing enough, being enough, achieving enough. And I think about how regular show would answer that anxiety. It would say, you showed up, you were there, that's enough. The park is still standing, the lawn still needs mowing, your friends are in the next room. And tomorrow, something impossible might happen, or nothing might happen. Either way, you'll be there for it, and that's enough. All right, it's late, or early, depending on how you look at it. And I realize I've been talking for a while now, which, honestly, feels appropriate for a show that never knew when to stop escalating. I hope some of this resonated with you. I hope the next time you see skips bounce across the screen, you think about Mona. I hope the next time you hear an 80s synth riff, you think about a flat town in California where a kid had nothing to do. And I hope the next time someone tells you that regular show is just a silly cartoon, you smile and nod and say nothing because you know better. You know it's an acid trip, a love story, a Greek tragedy, a work comedy, a cosmic epic, and a eulogy for innocence, all wrapped in an 11-minute episode format with a talking bird and a raccoon. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Seriously, I know there are 1,000 things you could be doing, or not doing, at this hour, and the fact that you chose to spend it here, listening to someone ramble about a cartoon at 2 a.m, that means something to me. It's a regular thing, you and me, doing this, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you haven't subscribed yet, now might be the time. We do this kind of thing regularly, excuse the pun. There's always another layer to peel back. Another show to explore, another secret hiding in plain sight. And I'll be here at 2 a.m, skipping through the darkness, for Mona, for Pops, for all of us. Good night, sleep well, and remember, nothing is ever as regular as it seems. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. Sleep.